Yeah, so I may or may not have put booze in this tonight. It's Romania Black, and an adult beverage seemed warranted because we are starting Volume 4, the last volume of Scum Villain's self-saving system. And oh my, I'm not gonna lie to you all. I read chapters 78 and 79 and 80 and 81 within a week of each other. Like less than a week, like less time than usual. And that was for scheduling reasons, and that was also a mistake. So, if you're still here, hi, it's great to have you here. We're going to start volume 4. I've got a statement that I've typed out because I've thought long and hard, because for myself, you may or may not have thought I was emotional the last 2 weeks with this story. I thought I was. I felt like I was being very emotional and very reactionary, and that's not me. And so I wanted to go back. There are some comments I want to talk about. We're going to look at volume 4 and the cover, which I have not paid much attention to. We're going to talk to that so we can analyze it a little bit further before we start. And talk about that. But yeah, so we're going to go over that. But I just took off the saran wrap today. I haven't looked at the back cover, but I did get a sneak peek. So yeah, this is volume 4. It's very mindful, very demure. I have some thoughts about this volume cover just right off the bat. I do like the framing of the illustration with the bamboo forest and everything. It feels like we're going back to the beginning. The side here looks like a journal, which to me, if these are all extra stories, could lend to that. So that's nice. My other thoughts were, the two that jump out to me are, one, it shows the robe falling off of Shin Cho's shoulders. So to me, that signifies both that we may see, hopefully, Shin Cho dropping his guard and being like, yes, I like you, okay. And also it seems indicative of maybe spicy things to come. We just can demurely show that to get past the censors. Also, the other thing I noticed is that Luo Binghe looks like a little puppy dog that pooped on your bathroom rug and now has to face the consequences and is like, oh, please don't get mad at me. And Shin Cho's like, son of a bitch, how can I when you're this cute? And it's, it is what it is. But I don't have any feral fandom art to show you right now, because right now I am overwhelmed with feral fandom art. As I'm recording this, you all won't believe this, but as I'm recording this, on Patreon, the chapters where we meet Shinju and do that whole flashback have just happened, to show you how far ahead I am. And I had to turn Discord off for today because I was really busy at work, and so I had it off all day long. And then I got to my car and I turned it on. It was like, it was like just an overflow waterfall of Shinju artwork. And I was like, oh my God. But I guess the floodgates had opened and everybody was waiting to talk about Shinju. And I was like, that's really cool. That's exciting. I hope you all are still happy with me 2 weeks later. But anyway, I also know this is the special edition that I purchased, because if you're going to go big or go home. So I know there are extras. They are tucked away. I am very happy with Scum Villain, because with Heaven Official's Blessing, the extras for that story in the final volume in the special edition, you just opened it up and they were just there. It was just like, here's all this special edition stuff. And trying to avoid spoilers, you were like, I don't want to look at it. With this, conveniently, they've tucked all of the extra stuff in the back cover. So the moment I unpackaged it, I was like, okay, the back cover has all the extras. I've been told by the moderators to not look at them yet because they're very spoilery. So we'll just keep them tucked away in the back until the very end, and then we'll read the back cover and check that out. So yay. That's super exciting. So I'll just have to wait for that. Before we start the comments and my little spiel, I do want to thank a couple people. First of all, Reiki. Reiki has gone through and broken and sent me the chapters. The chapter titles are spoiler tagged, which is exciting. We're going to have 10 weeks of volume 4. So we're going to start 2025 off with Scum Villain and get to probably the end of January before starting a brand new non-MXTX Donmai. And I don't know what to do with myself. So we'll probably have a poll on Patreon around the end of December, early January for that. Yay. It'll be a New Year's thing. But So we'll have 10 weeks with volume 4, and I'm excited about it. So thank you, Reiki, for breaking those chapters up, as well as sending me the spoiler tag chapter titles. We'll be looking at those as we go. Also want to thank the moderators who have talked me off many a ledge with these last 2 weeks, because I will talk about it here shortly, but I was very much in need of them. And I'm recording a lot of these chapters at night because I get off work, I come home, I want to read Scum Villain. But by the time I read them, they are asleep because they're in a totally different time zone than me. So it has been nice the following day for me to be like, this is what I've stewed on all night. And they're like, whoa, Miss Black Church, slow your roll. And I'm like, but! So yeah, so I figured tonight I just have a little bit of booze in my coffee to make myself maybe loosen up a little bit for this. It seemed like it would be warranted, perhaps. But anyway, so let's get in and talk about the comments before we get started with this and what we're going to be doing. And I'll explain the chapters as well, because there is something I want to make note. These first 2 weeks, we might as well just talk about right now. These first 2 weeks are going to go in order with the book. The first 2 weeks, today I'm going to be looking at chapters 82 through 84. I know that doesn't finish an entire section, and I'm probably going to be left with a cliffhanger. I am aware of that. But if I did read it, it was going to be like 70 pages. And I'm like, I can't do that. It's too much. I would gloss over things. My limit is like 40 pages. Once I get past 40 pages, I get tired. You get tired. Maybe you don't get tired, but I get tired, and I have to stop past 40 pages. And we were just right at our limit with chapters 82, 83, and 84. So we're going to do that this week. Next week, we'll do the rest, chapter 85 and chapter 86, which is a standalone story by itself. So I was like, that'll be perfect. We'll finish up. We'll probably have a cliffhanger this week. I'll probably get mad and yell about it. Y'all will know. But next week we'll conclude, get the rest of the story, and we'll do chapter 86, which is by itself. Now, one thing that Reiki pointed out, and I talked with the moderators at length about this, is that 7 Seas, for whatever reason, did not publish these chapters in order with how MXTX originally published them. I'm sure by the time I get to the very end, we can speculate the reasons, and we'll probably go back at the very end and see how they organized it in comparison and make guesstimates as to why that was. But that bothers me because I want to read it as MXTX put it out there. And so I asked the moderators, I was like, okay, do you think it's okay if I jump around in this version and read the chapters in order as MXTX put them out? And Be Happy was like, I actually think that would be better. And I'm like, okay. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do the chapters 82 through 84, 85 through 86, and then we're going to go in numerical order and read it all as MXTX put it out there. So I will be jumping around in this book a bit, but I will tell you at the start of the reactions where I'm at. So you'll be able to find out as well. So that'll be exciting. So you'll be able to follow along. I'll say the page numbers. Like for today, for example, we're doing in the book pages 11 through 49, which is 40 pages, enough. And then the PDF digital version is pages 3 through 33. So that's what we're doing. So that's going to be, next week's going to be a little bit shorter, but that's okay. We'll make that work. It'll be fine. But yeah, so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to do chapters 82 through 84, and I'm going to be prepared for a cliffhanger. And I did it to myself, so I can't be mad. Anyway, let's talk about the chapters and the statement I've got going into this. I'm sorry, this is a long introduction. Lily Kep said that Scum Villain's self-saving system is kind of known as the MXTX story that doesn't have any crack ships. Or more accurately, every ship is a crack ship, so they're all possible. And I guess, yeah, it's because this is like a novel, like choose your own adventure, you really can't go wrong with shipping characters together. So that's good to note. Amelia Jungclaws says that one thing that occurred to me is the punishment serves as more, and this is about Shin Ching-cho's punishment with the OG Luo Binghe, serves more as practical storytelling purposes as well. We need this to happen at least once so the audience knows that the system's threats aren't empty, that Shin Yan has good reason to follow the system's orders. Whether he could have followed them in a more productive and less frustrating way is another matter. And yeah, that's kind of what I talked about last week, is that Shin Yan has been going along with what the system says because he doesn't want to die, and so he really has no choice. Now, of course, in hindsight, you think, well, there was probably a better way for me to do it. But in the moment, it's kind of a metaphor for us that in the moment we don't think of the best way to do things, but we learn from those mistakes and we try in hindsight, to not let that happen again. But the system does punish him. So it's kind of like it reinforces this idea of, oh, if I don't do this right or what you say, I'm going to suffer for it. So it's kind of, it makes more sense. Cardboard Sheep says, now Cardboard Sheep said this, that Luo Binghe was gaslighting Shinshingshou so hard in the chapter set. But do you know who else loves gaslighting Shinshingshou? Shinshingshou does. So it's like they share a common hobby. It's great. And that's why they're so perfect together. And I was like, well, Shinshingshou's more in denial than gaslighting. And then Oddvi 2098 replied saying, well, I think manipulating or playing is more accurate. Gaslighting is different. So I know that I throw around the term gaslighting sometimes with maybe not correctly representing it. And I know gaslighting is one of those terms people just kind of say without knowing the meaning. So I went to a psychology site. I went to Very Well Mind, and they describe gaslighting as a form of manipulation and emotional abuse. Is Luo Binghe a gaslighter? Is Shinshingshou? Here are the top 8 gaslighting behaviors in relationships you can test, according to Very Well Mind. So I want to test them out here. Step 1 is lying to you. And it says people who engage in gaslighting are often habitual and pathological liars and frequently exhibit narcissistic tendencies. I would say neither. Shinshingshou and Luo Binghe to each other, I don't know if either of them directly are pathological liars. I think that I don't know if I would describe it that way. Then it says 2 is discrediting you, which is described as people who gaslight, spread rumors, and gossip about you to others. They may pretend to be worried about you while they subtly tell others that you seem emotionally unstable or crazy. No, neither of them do that. And in fact, Shinshingshou does not try to do that at all to Luo Binghe, and Luo Binghe doesn't try to do that to him either. So neither of them, so far, we're 0 for 0. Then is distracting. When you ask someone who gaslights a question or call them out for something they did or said, they may change the subject by asking a question instead of responding to the issue at hand. This not only throws off your train of thought, but also causes you to question the need to press a matter when they don't feel the need to respond. Now, on this one, they both do it. They both distract from answering the question. So both of them do that. So that is a trait of gaslighting that they both do. But the other two, not so much. Then it is minimizing your thoughts and feelings. Trivializing your emotions allows the person who is gaslighting you to gain power over you. They might make statements like, calm down, you're overreacting, or why are you so sensitive? All those statements minimize how you're feeling or what you're thinking and communicate that you're wrong. And I would argue that neither of them really do that either. There may be moments where they are internally thinking it, but I don't, especially Shinshingshou, but I don't think that they do it outwardly to each other enough to count. All right. Then there is number 5, which is shifting blame. Now, both of them do this, but Shinshingshou bears the brunt of this. And they describe this as shifting is another common gaslighting tactic. Every discussion you have is somehow twisted to where you are to blame for something that occurred. Even when you try to discuss how the abuser's behavior makes you feel, they're able to twist the conversation so you end up questioning if you are the cause of their bad behavior. For example, they may claim that if you behave differently, they would treat you the way they would not treat you the way that they do. Yeah, this is one gaslighting trait that Luo Binghe does to Shinshingshou a lot. He does shift the blame, being like, well, if people hadn't done this, I wouldn't be this way. And he does that a lot. So he shifts the blame quite a bit. And so that trait does happen. Then we have denying wrongdoing. People who engage in bullying and emotional abuse are notorious for denying that they did anything wrong. They do this and avoid taking responsibility for their poor choices. I would argue that neither of them really do that. Not really. So shifting blame, yeah, it does happen. Luo Binghe does that quite a bit, but they don't deny wrongdoing. So that's 4 and 2. Then there is using compassionate words as weapons. Sometimes, when called or out or questioned, a person who gaslights will use kind and loving words to try to smooth over the situation. They might say something like, well, you know how much I love you. I would never hurt you on purpose. These words may be what you want to hear, but they are inauthentic, especially if the same behavior is repeated. That said, they may just be enough to convince you to let them off the hook, which allows the person to escape responsibility or consequences for their hurtful behavior. Yeah, here's my thing. Luo Binghe does this one a lot throughout the whole story. the thing that is different from what they describe here is that Luo Binghe is genuine about his love. So he is being authentic, but he does not bear responsibility because he's just like, well, I love you, so it's okay that I do this. And we'll talk about that down below, but he does do that one. And then finally, rewriting history. A person who gaslights tends to retell stories in a way that are in their favor. For instance, if your partner shoved you against the wall, or you are discussing it later, they may twist the story and say that you stumbled and they tried to steady you, which is what caused you to fall into the wall. Now, Qing in his monologues kind of does this, but not as much in practice. I would argue this last one, the fandom does more than anything. Because in the comments, especially back in volume 2, everybody was like, well, but Luo Binghe shoving Qing against the wall, that was for these reasons. And him shoving the blood down his throat was for these reasons. And I'm like, and maybe Qing, you know, we talked about this in the Discord around the Shinju chapters, but sometimes I think the fandom, when things are not entirely spelled out in 100% concrete words, and there's a little bit of ambiguity, sometimes the fandom does take it to interpret it a certain way, and the fandom accepts that interpretation, whether it's canon or not. So far, 4 out of 4, there's a 50% chance there's gaslighting going on, but I don't really think so in the long run. I think that's not necessarily the case. Now, I went back through volume 1 a little bit, and Xinyan, at the very beginning of the story, said that the story itself would make him cough up a fountain of blood, and he did in the end, in volume 3. And the systems, the you can't up, you know, BB phrase, going back to volume 1, I was like, what did this mean again? In volume 1, it said, it means if you can do it, or shut up, which kind of ties to the climax of the story too. So, okay. So, here is my statement in regard to everything leading up to part 28 here, because we're 28 parts into Scum Villain, if you can believe it. So, here's my thing. I've had a week to cool off, week and a half to cool down after chapters 78 through 81. After chapter 80, I was just lost. I needed some validation, so I'm going to open up to you. I needed someone to have agreed with me that I wasn't taking crazy pills. And the moderators did help out tremendously, so thank you. But while I was in a moment of panic and desperation after reading chapter 80 and 81, and the moderators were asleep, and I knew they couldn't answer me. So I did something that I've never done before, and I will never do again. This one time I went to Reddit, and that was a mistake. Now look, I did not look up anything for volume 4 because I didn't want spoilers, and I didn't read anything about volume 4. As soon as I heard somebody say extras, I immediately passed out. I went to another site, so I don't know any spoilers about this book. I don't know. I didn't want to know. So, and I'm very self-disciplined when it comes to that. I'm like, I will self-discipline myself with spoilers. But I had recorded at the time when I got to chapters, you know, by the time I was at chapters 80 and 81, I was like nearly a month ahead of where y'all were watching. So I needed to try to find some people who agreed with me. But that did not happen. The majority of what I read, that I could read without being spoiled, had said that people who thought, as I did, just didn't understand the story, that it was too complex for them, and that they didn't understand MXTX's intentions. And it made me so irritated, because I don't know what the reaction from you all will be by the time you get to those 2 weeks, but I'm personally dreading it, because I was emotional, I wasn't thinking clearly how I wanted, and I was being very reactionary. So this may not be based at all on the reception that I end up getting, but I'm anticipating it, so here we go. I know that some people are probably going to comment that I don't understand chapter 80 and what is going on. And let me say, I do understand what's going on. I get what MXTX is doing. I get that Qing is a tsundere, and that while oblivious or unreliable, he does love Luo Binghe, and he phrases things in ways sometimes to distract from that fact, and has loved Luo Binghe since before even getting transmigrated into the book. We've seen throughout the story that Qing tries to say one thing, but he's thinking and meaning another. And I have had no qualms with Qing. It's just that Luo Binghe has had the tragic past, but I don't think that tragic past means excused from not growing as a character, especially as a main character. Because Shinju's not a main. Shinju, in reality, by the time we get to his flashback chapters, is not a main character anymore. He was, but he's not anymore. I think some people think that anybody that disagrees with their viewpoint is misunderstanding, but the reality is they just might not agree or not like it. And it's okay for me or anyone else to agree or disagree with what we just read. It doesn't mean that myself or those people are correct or incorrect or more enlightened or dumb or ignorant. To me, it's like, though chapter 80 has some what I would call dubcon and mainly a lack of payoff for now, with both of our leads, that was concerning and disappointing for me at the end of volume 3. And that's the main thing that I have with chapter 80. Shin Qingqiu, was in pain the entire experience. And while he did choose to have sex, it was only to save Luo Binghe and the world. And he was forced into that circumstance by Luo Binghe's actions and the system itself. Luo Binghe, I also felt sad for because he didn't get to enjoy the experience at all. It was like the mausoleum arc all over again. And then he had to see the love of his life in that awful position because of him. But I've talked through that scene last week. Mainly, I had expectations of where the climax was going to lead us, and it didn't go there. I kept waiting for Luo Binghe to take some responsibility in this relationship, for him to step up and become emotionally mature and not rely on Shin Qingqiu to bear the brunt of responsibility for so many things, and to realize that he doesn't have to consume all of Shin Qingqiu's attention. Shin Qingqiu can have friends, and Luo Binghe can be his lover. Personally, I would not consider Luo Binghe at this point to be someone that would be attractive to me. I think that they can be kind of yandere and childish. And with me relating a lot to Shin Qingqiu, I watch our peerless cucumber save him at the cost of his virginity and his friends. And while Luo Binghe apologizes at the end, Shin Qingqiu is like, "Oh no, it's my fault and my idea." And I would just honestly in that position expect Luo Binghe to be doing more on his part. Luo Binghe is like, "Well, you can stay in Sangjiang Mountain," but after Shin Qingqiu has been conditioned with Luo Binghe losing his mind and throwing a world-shattering tantrum every time Shin Qingqiu doesn't give him 100% of his attention, it feels to me like Shin Qingqiu just gives in to appease him, and that Luo Binghe doesn't realize the weight of what he's asking. So we've also seen Shin Qingqiu come full circle after the Shinjo chapters and tell Luo Binghe he would quote-unquote never make him cry again, which ends up being a lie, but that's not his fault, and actively work towards that relationship. But then Luo Binghe tosses all of his efforts to the wayside. And I wish there was more reflection and growth with Luo Binghe as a person. Having a sad past doesn't mean you get exempt from putting work into a relationship. Nor does it mean that you get what you want or otherwise sacrifice the world because your crush isn't devoting 100% of themselves to you. I was also expecting for the self-saving system to, save the two of them without scraping them across the rocks until they bled to near death. But another assumption that I saw on Reddit was that people have this assumption that complicated and dark and potentially unhealthy equals real. And I disagree. While those relationships do happen in real life, and real life relationships are not always fluffy and are complex and often complicated, I personally don't believe you should pursue any relationship that doesn't involve communication, consent, and emotional maturity between partners. No one should be your partner's life coach, your therapist, or be required to do every little thing for that person unconditionally without that person stepping up to the plate in return. Modao Zushi and Heaven Official's Blessing showcase, to me, MXTX's growth and maturity as an author in terms of the romance, in that she is able to see the main couples and prove them to be engaging, communicative, and work through their conflicts together in a healthy, fun, and engaging manner. And here, and this makes me sound like an old person, but I am, it does indeed feel like someone in high school wrote this romance. And that's not meaning to be a shade, but because how they perceive healthy relationships. But when you get to be my age, you've seen actual healthy relationships, and they don't look like this. And this isn't the type of relationship that I personally would aspire to have, nor seek out in my escapist fantasies. But I know that I still have volume 4 to read. And I'm going to try and give it a shot with a shot in my coffee and hope for the best. And maybe if we have Luo Binghe and Qing Jing actually involved together for the rest of this plot as an actual Danmai instead of a young stallion male fantasy, then maybe things will take a turn for the better. We can only hope. And that took me 25 minutes, so, here we are. But yeah, that's all I want to say about it. I hope y'all are kind in your comments. I'm never going to Reddit again. I learned my lesson, but yeah, so it's fine to disagree, and it's okay. But yeah, so I'm curious to see what we get with chapters 82 through 84 to start us out with the extras. It's going to be interesting, but I hope you all enjoy. So we're not going to waste any more time. We are going to dive right in and look at volume 4 of Scum Villain Self-Saving System. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and I'll go. So yep, here we go. Here is our, oh, we didn't actually get to look at the inside cover, did we? There's a book there. Oh, there's a pretty little, there's an actual house there beyond that. Oh, we're not gonna look any more at that. I saw the color red and I was like, oh no, if there's a wedding, we're gonna leave that out there. We'll keep that out there. So nope, we're not ready for that. Nope. I'll go back to that. If we get to a wedding chapter, I'll go back to it, but I don't want to know for sure. Damn it. Okay. So, part 22, chapter 82. Binghe and Binghe's ultimate showdown. Who's Binghe? Who's Binghe? I know Binghe is Luo Binghe, but who is Binghe? What is this? The first stop after leaving Sanjiang Mountain, having been chased out by everyone else, was, of course, Luo Binghe's demon headquarters at the northern border of the demon realm. Now, were they chased out? I mean, Luo Binghe wasn't welcome because he's a brat. But Qing Jing agreed to go with him, out of the kindness of his heart. Qing Jing had stayed in the underground palace for a while previously during his house arrest. Right. At that time, the soil outside the perfect replica of the bamboo house had been overturned and strewn with fertilizer, while the bamboo, both tall and short, had died and been replanted, only for the new bamboo to die as well. But when they visited the old location now, he found that Luo Binghe's demon lackeys must have employed some mysterious technique, for the bamboo actually had flourished to form a canopy of rustling green. So this is in the demon realm. Okay. All right. So the cover makes sense. The first 10 or so days after their arrival, as was to be expected, Luo Binghe had clung to Qing Jing such that he couldn't be swatted off no matter what Qing Jing tried. But these last few days, he'd started to show some restraint, and suddenly had become courteous. Citing his many pressing duties due to the unending conflict in which the northern and southern borders had been lately embroiled, the amount of time spent orbiting Qing Jing had greatly decreased. Naturally, this was an excuse. Qing Jing was pretty sure the true reason for Luo Binghe's absence was that he'd gracefully declined Luo Binghe's request to sleep in the same bed. Oh, and thus yet again hurt Maiden Luo's glass heart. Goodbye! Okay, but let's be fair. After what happened at the end of Volume 3, Would your immediate first step be like, oh, let's have sex again after something that traumatic? No. No, it would not. Absolutely not. I'm like, again, whenever Binghe's like, oh no, I'm like, okay, grow up. Come on. Mature. Damn it. Grow like the dew mushroom. Look, he'd refused out of habit. So, but is that the case though? If Luo Binghe had just pestered him a little more, he would have agreed. Who could have guessed that after a mere wave of his hand, Luo Binghe would rush out the door to go find a corner to sulkily grow mushrooms in? Oh, because it's like the thing of growing mushrooms and everything there, right? That's another thing too. I don't know how I like that because again, if you've been a victim of assault, no offense, I don't know, I can't speak for everyone, but for myself, when something like that happens that's traumatizing like that, you don't just immediately go, I'm ready to go. It's been a few weeks. I'm ready to have sex again. It's fine. That's not how that works. And I know that what happened to Qing Jing was not necessarily, it was not assault in the way that was non-consensual because he did agree to it, but it was an assault. It wasn't necessarily Luo Binghe's fault because he was under the influence of Jin Mo, but it was an assault. And I wouldn't just immediately, here, it almost feels like Qing Jing is just saying that so that he can be like, yeah, I would have totally done it. It's just out of habit that it seems like he's almost in denial and doesn't want to bring up that he's traumatized from what happened to him. He's trying to brush it off. That's what it feels like. Right? Okay. Qing Jing suspected that over these few days, Luo Binghe had probably gone to hide in the inner hall. So he decided he might as well head over there himself to soothe him. Well, and that's my thing too. I'm like, Qing Jing should not have to be the one to always go crawling back to Luo Binghe. Luo Binghe needs to mature, maybe ask why Qing Jing said no, and they should like legit communicate with one another. Like, why did you not want me to sleep with you? And Qing Jing should answer that question. But Luo Binghe needs to be mature enough to ask it. He should not just sit in the corner and wait for Qing Jing to come and give him a piece of birthday cake. You know, he shouldn't have to be required to do that all the time. I wouldn't have. I've been like, get some balls and come back here and talk to me. All were forbidden from entering the inner hall, except for Luo Binghe. Needless to say, all didn't include Qing Jing. Luo Binghe had said before that Qing Jing was free to wander anywhere except the West Wing in the underground palace, and that he could even do so with his eyes shut. This order had been passed down to everyone, so obviously there were no utter fools who would dare stop him. Qing Jing boldly slipped into the hall, but to his surprise he didn't see Luo Binghe. Thus instead he gave this private little space of Luo Binghe's, which had been tightly kept under wraps in the past, a deep and thorough look. We're going to explore the West Wing. Just as he was preparing to also give the room a deep and thorough probe, seems a little bit like a sexual innuendo there, the stone gates were flung open and a silhouette barreled in, stumbling and tripping. At first, Qing Jing's expression sharpened, but after taking a good look at the person, he blurted out, Luo Binghe. It seemed that Luo Binghe hadn't anticipated that another person would be within the inner hall. His dazed pupils contracted, leaving Qing Jing's face reflected in those jet-black irises. And what had originally been overflowing murder's intent abruptly transformed into 10,000 points of stupefaction. Ha! He's like, I was going to kill whoever came in here. Oh, it's you. But Qing Jing failed to notice this. All he could see at that moment was the fresh blood drenching Luo Binghe's face and body. Luo Binghe took several steps forward, and then his legs went weak. Qing Jing went to meet him, just in time to catch Luo Binghe as he fell forward in his embrace. His arms automatically and easily wrapped around Luo Binghe's blood-soaked back. What happened? Who did this? To think there would come a day when Luo Binghe could be beaten up to this extent and in his own territory. All right, to be honest, this couldn't be considered a bug in the code. If the male lead of a stallion novel had turned gay, what type of plot development could qualify as a bug? So basically anything goes now. Luo Binghe's throat bobbed, and his teeth were clenched so tightly they seemed about to be broken. But he still furiously spat out a word from between them. Leave! Leave? Meaning he wanted Qing Jing to escape? All right, let's leave, Qing Jing said quickly. As he spoke, he moved to support Luo Binghe's waist. Unexpectedly, Luo Binghe's lips thinned, and he violently shoved him away. It was the first time Qing Jing had ever been shoved away by this particular person, and he froze on the spot. Did the kid want him to leave by himself first? Was he afraid he'd drag him down? I don't know. Also, real quick, I don't know if I like Shinshingsho calling him kid, because if they're your partner, I don't know if you should call them kid. It makes it seem like more like a parent and child relationship, which is not, I don't like that. I don't like that translation. That seemed like the only reason. Also, it makes it seem like Luo Binghe is a child and Shinshingsho has to take care of him. And I'm like, Luo Binghe's in his mid-20s. He's not a kid. I mean, maybe mentally, but he's not a kid. Yeah. Anyway, that seemed like the only reasonable explanation. So he immediately said, well, don't fuss. This master will take you back to Sanjiang Mountain. The veins on Luo Binghe's forehead bulged. No, he snarled. Shinshingsho thought he was throwing another tantrum. How can you fuss when you're already in such a state? We'll hide there for a bit first. As Shinshingsho spoke, his palm pressed against Luo Binghe's back. Luo Binghe's face went rigid. From behind him flowed a warm, ceaseless stream of spiritual energy. Wave after wave of it was sent into his body. After a while of this, Shinshingsho decided he'd done about enough and withdrew his hand to unsheath Zhuya. He pulled up Luo Binghe and lifted off, soaring into the skies. So he let him do it. Zhuya was from Wanjiang Peak, so regardless of the time, riding Zhuya through Sanjiang Mountain's aerial defense barrier didn't trip any alarms. Therefore, Shinshingsho could bring another person back to Qing Jing Peak completely undetected. It was just that while concealing this from the other peaks was possible, concealing it from his own disciples was not. When he crept into the bamboo house dragging Luo Binghe beside him, people were already waiting inside. Mingfan was holding a broom, sweeping the floor while chattering away. Ning Ying stood on her toes on a little bamboo stool with her sleeves rolled up, using a horsetail to clear off the dust on the bookcase's topmost shelf. Shinshingsho kicked the door open, giving them both quite a scare. After a proper second look, right away they let out a crowd. Oh, Shinshingsho made a zipping motion before his lips, instantly stopping them from making another sound. Don't yell, he whispered. Do you want to summon that Baizan Peak crowd too? Meaning Liu Qingge. If Liu Qingge knew of their return, he'd definitely come over. And if he came over, there would be no way to hide Luo Binghe while he was in this state. One must understand that whenever there was a glimpse of Luo Binghe on Sanjiang Mountain, the ones most raring to deliver a beatdown unto him were those terrorists from Baizan Peak. Because of Shinshingsho, Luo Binghe dared not strike back, so every time he ended up as a sitting duck as they chased and pummeled him. Even if they couldn't beat him to death, it was incredibly troublesome. I mean, yeah, I do feel for Luo Binghe because it is not good that they try to hurt him. I get where Luo Qingge is coming from, but it'd be nice if they just talked it out. But Luo Binghe talking things out, that's not going to happen. Ning Ying's apricot eyes went wide. I like that description. And she covered her mouth with both hands while automatically nodding. The image not unlike that of a little chick pecking for grain. As she gave the blood-soaked Luo Binghe another look, she removed her hands and gasped, Shizun, what happened to Alo? Luo Binghe sent Mingfan a sideways glance, and an expression of extreme loathing mixed with disbelief flashed in the depths of Luo Binghe's eyes. The look was bone-piercingly cold. Mingfan couldn't help but clutch his broom tighter and shrink into himself, almost falling to the ground right there. Why are you looking at Mingfan that way? He hasn't even done anything. But Shinshingsho didn't catch this little exchange and helped Luo Binghe to sit on the side of the bed. He suffered some injuries. You two head out first. Is the medicine chest from Shanjiao Peak where it used to be? Nothing inside the bamboo house has been moved, said Ning Ying. Everything's in its place. Does Shizun need his disciples to help? No. This master can do it himself. I'm guessing Luo Binghe gave Mingfan the look to be like, don't go find Liu Qingge or I'll kill you. But again, Luo Binghe, you're not making people like you anymore if you're going to be a bastard all the time. After chasing off both disciples, Shinshingsho helped Luo Binghe sit up, then placed a pillow behind his back for him to lean on. Only then did he crouch to remove Luo Binghe's shoes. Luo Binghe remained silent, his lips pressed tightly together. Once Shinshingsho lowered his head, Luo Binghe's line of sight focused on his pale nape. His gaze unfathomable as a frigid wariness circulated within him. Did you bring him here just to get feisty with him, Luo Binghe? Shinshingsho assumed that he was grievously injured and lacked the strength to speak. Noticing how his forehead trickled with cold sweat, he brought over some clean water and soft towels to help him wipe his face. Then he picked out a selection of bottles from the medicine chest that Mu Qingfang had issued to him before turning around, reaching out to undo Luo Binghe's clothes, but Luo Binghe abruptly caught his hand. The force of this grip was tremendous. Shen Qingqiu frowned, but he couldn't use the other hand to smack Luo Binghe's forehead. He lowered his voice to say, "Stop being difficult and let me see your wound." But still Luo Binghe refused to release his hand. Shen Qingqiu's left hand was clutching an assortment of medicinal pills, and he'd long since lost his patience. At this moment, he decided to just cram them all in Luo Binghe's mouth. "Now, why don't you two bastards talk it out? Why is he not letting you undo his clothes?" Now that a few dozen medicinal pills, all of various sizes, had been stuffed into his mouth, Luo Binghe's face was dark, and he finally withdrew his hand. Shen Qingqiu took this chance to tear open his clothes. After a couple of glances, he was at a bit of a loss where to start. In the end, he only risked using a soft towel to dab at a large blood stain. Threads of black qi oozed from the curling flesh. It didn't look like a regular wound. Otherwise, with Luo Binghe's regeneration abilities, it would have been flawlessly healed long ago. Shen Qingqiu carefully cleaned it for him while saying, "Where have you been hiding these past few days? Who did you fight who could leave you like this?" From beginning to end, Luo Binghe remained silent. Once Shen Qingqiu finished wiping his chest, he followed Mu Qingfang's teachings and took Luo Binghe's wrist to examine his pulse. If the situation really was bad, he'd call Mu Qingfang over first and figure out the rest later. As he studied Luo Binghe's pulse, Shen Qingqiu gave his hand and chest another couple of glances. A strange uneasiness crept over his heart. He had a vague feeling that something was wrong, as if something was missing. But when he looked at Luo Binghe's paling lips and cold eyes, Shen Qingqiu couldn't spare it too much thought. He sat on the edge of the bed and continued to send spiritual energy into him. As that energy flowed into Luo Binghe's meridians, Shen Qingqiu felt his stiff muscles gradually relax. He quietly sighed with relief and then reached out, intending to pull Luo Binghe into his arms. But once again, Luo Binghe struggled free. So we said Bing Mei at the beginning of this. Is this not Luo Binghe? Is it somebody else impersonating him, and that's why he doesn't want to get close to Shen Qingqiu? Now that Shen Qingqiu had been shoved away a second time, he tossed aside the towel in his right hand and said helplessly, "What is wrong with you now?" Luo Binghe's eyes overflowed with a wary guardedness. Shen Qingqiu internally rolled his eyes. "We've already reached this point, and you're still throwing a tantrum?" He chided him. "The simple fact that I wouldn't sleep with you 2 days ago was enough to make you angry for this long?" At these words, the corner of Luo Binghe's mouth seemed to twitch. Upset, Shen Qingqiu changed the direction of his outstretched hand to touch Luo Binghe's forehead instead. "It's a bit hot," he muttered. "Do you feel dizzy?" Suddenly, Ning Yingying's voice drifted in from outside. "Liu Shishu, you can't go in. It's a bad time for Shizun right now. Oh, yeah, good. The usual Ning Yingying was soft-spoken, her manner coquettish, sometimes to the point where she was impossible to understand if you weren't right next to her. So if she was acting so out of character as to yell, it was obviously sending a message to Shen Qingqiu where he was inside. He leapt headlong off the bed. Right as he closed the curtains behind him, the bamboo house's door slammed open with a thud. Liu Qingge burst into the room, sword on his back. Shen Qingqiu had one arm behind his back as he turned around, eyebrow raised. "I trust Liu Shidi has been well." Liu Qingge opened fire right away. Sangjiang Mountain has a rule forbidding entrance to Luo Binghe. How come I've never heard of this rule? It's new. Well, I guess that explains why they have to leave. But why can't we talk this out? Ming Fan stretched out his head to interject. "That's right, Shizung. Sangjiang Mountain really does have that rule now. It's just that Zhangmin Shido hasn't yet engraved it onto the rule slab. Everyone knows." "Oh, you shut up," Shen Qingqiu scolded him. "Don't think I don't know that you're the one who called Liu Qingge here, you rascal." Bold move, Cotton. That kid had admired Baizan Peak for forever. Anytime something slightly noteworthy happened, he reported it to Liu Qingge. He'd practically become their personal spy on Qing Jing Peak. Though one could say that the widespread admiration of Bison Peak among the youths was understandable, this kind of little maneuver, even going so far as to secretly tattle, it was simply shameful. I'll teach you a lesson later. Xinqingzhou's like, now we can't be doing this, right? So I guess that explains why they have to leave at the end of volume 3, because it's a rule now that Luo Binghe can't be here because he's an ass. But again, like I said in the last volume, I feel like with Modao Zushi and Heaven Official's blessing, the choice for the main couples to go away is because they want to and they have a mutual love for each other and X, Y, and Z. This seems kind of like MXTX just made it happen for it to be a narrative plot point and to justify it. But I'm like, is it the best writing? You could argue that it's not. Having been scolded, Ming Fan wilted and withdrew in dismay. Ning Yingying had been apprehensively standing at the door, but needing to vent her anger, she viciously stomped on his foot, all while muttering that he'd ruined things. The moment the two of them retreated, Liu Qingge threw open the bed curtain. Luo Binghe was half sitting on the bed, his eyes flashing with a savage light, not unlike a young wounded leopard. His murderous intent roiled as he glared at Liu Qingge, his gaze like unto both icy knives and poisonous flames. Ooh, of fire and ice. A spiritual blast was clasped within his hand, ready to fire at any moment. Xinqingzhou rushed to put himself between them, bracing one leg on the bed board as he shielded Luo Binghe behind him. Now, Shidi, stop this. Liu Qingge was surprised. He's injured? Xinqingzhou wanted to dearly bow to him. He sighed. If he wasn't injured, I wouldn't have brought him back. Just pretend you didn't see anything, Liu Shidi. Don't chase him off. If he's injured, why not remain in the demon realm? Well, it was because he'd remained in the demon realm that he got injured. Well, something happened. Did those demonic monsters stage a revolt? Xinqingzhou sent Luo Binghe a brief sideways glance. He didn't actually know if this was the outcome of demonic internal affairs or whether it was appropriate to say so, and thus he gave a vague answer. They might have? He's like, I might have brought him here without knowing the full story. He should clean up his own mess. Sangjiang Mountain will always be here for you to support you, but not him. Well. Now that is a little bit rude, Liu Qingge. You could be nicer. You know how he feels about him. Luo Binghe suddenly let out a cold laugh. This aggravated the wounds on his chest and he gritted his teeth, silently braving the pain. Watching him endure and suffer, a sudden rush of courage bloomed within Xinqingzhou, and he said sternly, Liu Shidi, don't forget that this is Qing Jing Peak. Whether Qing Jing Peak gave someone safe harbor was, it went without saying, a decision made by the Qing Jing Peak Lord. Liu Qingge's expression became cold with anger and disappointment. Then continue protecting him. After throwing down these words, he stomped out the door. It hadn't been 2 seconds before he came stomping back, and he threw something in Xinqingzhou's arms. I like that he walked out. He's like, and another thing. Oh, Xinqingzhou caught it and looked. It was that fan of his. Again, the fan that had fallen out of his grasp sometime during that chaotic battle on the Low River. Every time it was Liu Qingge who picked it up. It seemed like his fate and the fans were quite intertwined. Maybe I should just straight up give it to him as a present. Xinqingzhou, you dumbass! He likes you! He coughed dryly and then said genially, I'm forever troubling Liu Shidi. Liu Qingge left with a flick of his sleeves. Luo Binghe's voice rang out from behind Xinqingzhou, the sound a little raspy. Liu Qingge? It was said as a genuine, doubt-filled inquiry. Well, don't worry about him, said Xinqingzhou. He's just like this, all bark and no bite. After barking, he leaves. Luo Binghe narrowed his eyes, his face gradually taking on a thoughtful expression. I don't know if this is Luo Binghe. This could be someone else impersonating him that got injured and came back to try to attack Xinqingzhou. I don't know, because this seems like, the moment that Xinqingzhou acknowledged this was Liu Qingge, whoever might be impersonating Luo Binghe was like, oh, is this him? Is this who it is? Like they're trying to figure things out? Maybe, what What if Bing Mei is someone that's transmigrated into Luo Binghe? What if Luo Binghe's been transmigrated into somebody else? I don't think that that's really going to happen. But what if they did and they were like, it wasn't Liu Qinghe supposed to die in the original story? Now, before we move on, I will say it is bad that they made a rule that was banning Luo Binghe from Sangjiang Mountain Peak. That's really sad. Shame on them. They shouldn't do that. They should try to talk things out and work things out with Luo Binghe. Luo Binghe doesn't help himself at all in any of this. And Liu Qinghe clearly likes Xinqing, so it's kind of like when you have a crush on somebody, but they're with a really immature, bratty kid, and you're like, you deserve better. You could do better. That's kind of how I feel Liu Qinghe feels with Xinqing. He's like, Xinqing, you could do better, but you're settling for this man. and so I feel where he's coming from. But, you know, Luo Binghe has his qualities. Xinqing placed the fan on the table. Have no fear, he consoled him. Since this master has spoken his piece, he won't come bothering you for some time. If the Bison Peak disciples come to gang up on you again, you can hit back. As long as you don't kill them, it'll be fine. There's no need to accommodate them. This would save Qing Jing Peak some face. The more Luo Binghe listened, the otter's expression in his eyes became. As if testing the waters, he said the word Shizun. Xinqing cocked his head. Both his tone and expression brimmed with 120% warm indulgence. A promise to grant whatever request Luo Binghe might have. Luo Binghe withdrew his gaze, the corner of his mouth twitching. Nothing, I just wanted to try saying it. This is not Luo Binghe. This is somebody else. Has to be. No matter the situation, this child would unfailingly call out to him, Shizun, Shizun. None of this was news to Xinqing. He stroked the back of Luo Binghe's head. Why don't you sleep? Whatever's happening over there with the demons can be left until you've finished recovering. Luo Binghe gave him an almost imperceptible nod. At this, Xinqing bent down and removed the pillow at his back, and then helped him lie down. Before Luo Binghe met the bed, Xinqing carefully unfastened his hair tie, in case his skull pressed on it in his sleep and he hurt his head. Only after doing this did Xinqing blow out the lamps, remove his own outer robes with a rustle, and get into the bed as well. He held Luo Binghe and said, Sleep, this master will regulate your breathing. Now he'd both hugged and slept with Luo Binghe. That ought to dispel that little tantrum from before, right? Xinqing closed his eyes, adjusting his spiritual circulation to its calmest possible state, as placid as evening dew, and used it to gently flush Luo Binghe's meridians. I will say before we go any further, the idea that I don't like the idea where Xinqing like, well, I've hugged you and I'm sleeping with you, so now you're not going to be mad anymore, right? I'm not personally a fan of that type of relationship dynamic because it's like, it feels a little like trapped housewifey. So, but maybe it'll get better. In the darkness, a pair of clear, glittering eyes flashed with cold light. Even after a long time, they did not close, but remained fixed on the peacefully sleeping Xinqing. Xinqing's long hair lay draped over his arm and between his fingers. Luo Binghe took hold of one of those black locks, his grip slowly clenching, and soundlessly mouthed a name over and over again. Xinqing. Xinqing. A dark and sinister curve tugged his lip upwards. Yeah, this is not him! The silent smile on Luo Binghe's face grew wider and wider. As if he discovered some amusing plaything, his eyes began to shine with an excitement, one that seemed to hold the slightest hint of cruelty. Yeah, this is not Luo Binghe. So, I don't know. If we go back a little bit up to the start of the chapter. So, Xinqing had been mad. We'll talk about it in the discussion. We'll go back to these chapters and talk about it in the discussion. We'll do that. But, okay. Chapter 83. Oh my god, we're only to chapter 83. Holy cow. That night, Xinqing's dreams were both torturous and unending. When the dawn of the second day came, the first to open his eyes was Luo Binghe. Some color had returned to his snow-pale face, and his complexion was much improved over how much it had been the previous night. On the contrary, the one who had been bursting with energy the evening prior before they retired, who'd held Luo Binghe all the way until they woke, was now dazed, drowsy, and seemed a bit fatigued. Well, you've been giving him your spiritual energy. Xinqing had, in fact, passed an entire night's worth of spiritual energy into Luo Binghe, not stopping even after he dozed off. Uh-oh. Luo Binghe slowly fluttered his eyelashes. For a while, he gazed at Shin Qingqiu with a complicated expression, and then reached out to move Shin Qingqiu's arms. The moment Shin Qingqiu was moved, he startled up, jolted even further awake. Luo Binghe took this chance to sit up and leave the bed. Shin Qingqiu was profoundly bewildered. Usually it was impossible to dislodge Luo Binghe even when he kicked. Yet this morning, Luo Binghe had voluntarily detached themselves. So they've slept together since I guess we don't know how long it's been since the mountain, but they have slept in the same bed together, right? That seems to be the case. He pinched the bridge of his nose and wrinkled his brow. What are you doing up so early? Making breakfast? You don't have to today. Then he saw that Luo Binghe was wearing only a thin inner robe, the collar left undone. His vast crisscrossing wounds had already closed, leaving nothing more than faint marks. They would probably be done healing by the end of the day. However, this left almost half his chest wholly exposed to the elements. That outer robe from the night prior could no longer be worn, so Shin Qingqiu reminded him, hey, your old clothes are still in the side room. Ying Ying and the others haven't touched him. Well, when he turns around, is he going to see like the scar from the sword thing? Is he going to see that and know it's not him or not? I'm so curious. Luo Binghe slipped around and behind the screen, heading to the side room. A spotless little world of its own met his eyes. There was a furniture set constructed from green bamboo, complete with a table, chair, bed, and cabinet. At the head of the bed there was even a small stand, upon which lay neatly shelved scrolls and all manner of brushes, the latter arranged according to length. Upon opening the cabinet doors, he found folded white robes all stowed away in a tidy fashion, and above them there even hung high-quality jade accessories in various styles. In the time Luo Binghe was in the side room, Shin Qingqiu slowly rose from the bed. He scanned for where he'd left his shoes while rubbing his temples. What a terrible fucking sleep he'd had. He was about to lose it. It'd been dream after dream, dream after dream after dream. Even his shameful dark memory of fighting Skinner Demon and Shang Hua City had been dredged up. And even dreams within dreams. The Immortal Alliance Conference, Jinlan City, Huayu City, the Holy Mausoleum. He'd gone through everything like a merry-go-round, including the times he'd been beaten, the times he'd coughed up blood, the times his body had sprouted with all over foliage. So I wonder if this being is not Luo Binghe, and it's this Bing Mei, and it's trying to like invade Shin Qingqiu's dreams to figure out all the memories of him and Luo Binghe so that he can seem more like Luo Binghe. If this is not Luo Binghe and Luo Binghe figures out Shizun's in danger, it's all bars are off, right? Having so many dreams crammed into his head in one night, it was about to explode. It was abso-fucking-lutely because he'd passed all that spiritual energy into Luo Binghe while sleeping. Whenever Luo Binghe's psyche was unstable, anyone who slept near him would suffer. That must be all the time. It's like when your partner snores all the time and you're just like, I gotta go somewhere else. At that moment, Luo Binghe finished dressing and emerged from the side room with a turn. Shin Qingqiu had yet to find his shoes, but he stopped looking. Instead, he waved at Luo Binghe to beckon him over to bed and then pulled him down. However, Luo Binghe failed to be pulled. He raised an eyebrow. What are you doing? Shin Qingqiu felt around beneath the pillow and pulled out a hair tie alongside a wooden brush. Well, what do you think? Only then did Luo Binghe obediently sit down in front of him while glancing all around the bamboo house. And now, see, if that had actually been Luo Binghe, he would have not only sat down, but would have like shoved the brush and hair tie away and probably tried to make out with him. If it had been the real Luo Binghe. Only then did Luo Binghe obediently sit down in front of him while glancing all around the bamboo house. As Shin Qingqiu brushed his hair, he asked on a whim, well, what are you looking at? Luo Binghe's gaze remained sharp and cold, but his voice warmed and softened. These past few years, every time I returned to Qing Jing Peak, it was in a rush. I could never give it a proper look. Shin Qingqiu held the hair tie between his teeth and impishly braided him a tiny plait in secret. Aw. Well, then these days you can look your fill. I'll pay Baizon Peak a visit later and get Liu Qingge to properly discipline the lot of them. There's absolutely no rationale to justify Qing Jing Peak disciples being chased around by Baizon Peaks. Luo Binghe stilled for a while. Then he slowly turned his head and smiled at him before saying sweetly, Shizun? Shizun. It was as if this Luo Binghe's very first time using such a novel term of address. He repeated it again and again without pause. Every time he did, he received an answer, and he grew increasingly addicted to it, until Xingqiu couldn't take it anymore. He picked up his fan and swatted the back of Luo Binghe's head. Well, enough with Shizun. Once is sufficient. Say what you mean properly. Now that he'd been struck on the back of the head, Luo Binghe's expression darkened. But he swiftly rectified it and smiled ambiguously. His gaze swept to the side. Did Shizun sleep well last night? Could I sleep well while holding you? Xingqiu thought. But he said mildly, I dreamed a number of old affairs, that's all. The next time, should I hold Shizun while we sleep instead? Of course he could say such words so casually. Having accomplished his task, Xingqiu patted his head and brushed him off the bed. Go, 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 go. Then Xingqiu did as he promised and paid Baizon Peak a visit. Heading over there was familiar and easy. He didn't even need to deliver a visitor's notice. After swallowing 2 mouthfuls of light kanji Ming Fan sent him, he adjusted his clothes and sauntered off. Notice it was what Ming Fan made, not Luo Binghe. He left Luo Binghe behind in his bamboo house, admonishing him to be good and wait until his master comes back. But as if Luo Binghe would be willing to just be good and wait. Luo Binghe had just opened the door when he saw a delicate, orange-colored figure bound towards him. He took a good look and then said, full of smiles, Ying Ying. Unexpectedly, Ning Ying Ying shuddered and paled in shock. What's wrong with you, Luo? Did you hit your head? Why did you address me like that? What the hell is with this Ying Ying? That's terrifying. Luo Binghe fell silent. Ning Ying Ying's expression of pure horror had yet to fade. Why didn't you call me Ning Shiji? A pause. Ning Shiji. That Shiji was uttered with a fair amount of internally gnashed teeth. Ning Shiji sighed in relief and patted her chest as she chided him. Now that's better. Changing terms of address like that out of the blue, it didn't sound like you at all. Shizun may dote on you, but you must always respect seniority. That way we dishonor neither our status as Qing Jing Peak's disciples nor Shizun's teachings. Upon hearing this, the veins bulged in Luo Binghe's forehead and he lost patience. I have something to ask you. Understanding shortly dawned on Ning Ying Ying's face. With a wave, she solemnly placed a whisk and broom into Luo Binghe's hands. Shiji understands. Here. Silence. Don't take offense, Luo, Ning Ying Ying said sincerely. You invariably want to clean Shizun's bamboo house by yourself. I know that. But the two of you were gone for a long time, so Da Zhejiang and I could only get started on it ourselves. However, since you've returned, I'll leave it to you. Shiji won't compete with you for chores. When it comes to this, Shiji still understands. Like, fuck you do! Oh! Luo Binghe turned and left for Zhanshu Peak. Zhanshu Peak's disciples had always welcomed him very warmly, no matter where he went, so it was the same. Oh! In the past, Xingqiu had given Luo Binghe quite a few miscellaneous errands. Thus, one could have found him on Zhanshu Peak. From time to time, he'd gone there to deliver a letter, distribute a notice, invite someone over, or borrow something. When male disciples from other peaks came, they would at least sneak a couple of peeps, peering around and around until they ended up looking inside the maiden's quarters or bathhouse. Naturally, they would be handled to death by the maiden's swords long before they made it to the bathhouse. So basically, this is, okay, so we're going to talk about this in discussion, but this is not Luo Binghe for reasons. And 2, the ladies at Zhanshu Peak were like, nope, bye, get out, or we will make you wish you'd never came. Only Luo Binghe treated the Peak disciples with respect and consciously maintained a strict distance every time he came because he's gay. His reputation at Zhanshu Peak was correspondingly high. Therefore, everyone on Zhanshu Peak had given him tacit permission to enter the halls and wait. Yeah, because he's gay. He's not going to try to do anything disrespectful to them. Oh my God. With her face veiled, Liu Mingyan politely bowed in greeting. Lo Shizhong. Luo Binghe had yet to speak when she nodded at him and continued. Did Lo Shizhong come to invite Shizun on Shinshibo's orders? Oh, please wait here for a while. I will make first arrangements for my Taoist friends from Tianli Temple, and then I'll return. So I like that Luo Binghe, in quotation marks, is going to see the sister, and Xingqiu is going to see the brother, right? The 3 Taoist friends she spoke of were the beautiful nuns. Oh! Their lovely, delicate figures were enveloped in aquamarine Taoist robes as they orbited her. 6 liquid eyes stared at Luo Binghe as they spent a moment whispering into each other's ears, then spent another moment stamping their feet coquettishly, their cheeks flushed red. They were like 3 radiant blue blooms circled around a slender lotus, playing and giggling before they all headed out as a group. As promised, Luo Binghe waited patiently for Liu Mingyan to return. After standing there for a short while, he realized that the corner of the small book was peeking out from amidst the mess of scrolls upon her desk. It was so obvious that it had been shoved beneath them in a hurry. He casually picked up the booklet she'd been hidden and gave it a rough glance over. Finding the cover gaudy, with each of the titles 3 words written in a more ridiculous cursive than the last, he wrinkled his brow. He smiled at the signature of Sleeping Willow Flower and flipped it open. And was struck silent. I mean, is Liu Mingyan, was she hiding in her purity some lady porn? Perhaps, methinks. When Qing Jing returned from Bison Peak after drinking tea and having a heart-to-heart, oh my god, so he just went, had tea with Luo Binghe, and was like, hey, quit being a dick. And they were like, you want some tea? Yeah, sure. Luo Binghe was waiting for him within the bamboo house. The moment he entered, he felt a gaze shoot over him, boiling and burning. Qing Jing made an internal face. Well, now, I'm a bit afraid to close the door. What's going on? Atop the bed, Luo Binghe reclined on his side and smiled. What's wrong? Why won't Shizun come here? While it was said in that same soft tone, touched by a little bit of hurt, his eyes told a different story. He was looking Qing Jing up and down, as if he'd never seen him before. And it was like he was trying to scrape off a layer of Qing Jing's skin with his eyes. Qing Jing's appearance was stellar. His shoulders were neither too broad nor too bulky, while his waist was thin and his legs long. Enveloped in Qing Jing Peak's many-layered teal uniform, he was immaculate and slender, with a great deal of graceful beauty. Yes, it was graceful beauty. Qing Jing pushed the door shut behind him. He had yet to get within 5 steps of Luo Binghe when he was yanked forward, and he fell into Luo Binghe's embrace as those arms tightened around his waist. Luo Binghe's fingers trailed down his side, occasionally squeezing and kneading. Hand, thank you, your hand! When Qing Jing went to grab Luo Binghe's paw in a backhanded grip, he twisted. Somehow, Qing Jing found himself pressed down on top of Luo Binghe's thighs, with his legs apart, trapped in place. In the next moment, Luo Binghe's caressed his nape before pulling him down, and his lips were captured again. He dared not move. Fuck, in this position, he really didn't dare move. Though they'd engaged in activities far surpassing this a while back. The previous time had been a special situation. Plus, there had been an impending disaster, so there had been no time to worry about shyness or reservations. And while they'd been fairly intimate during their near half-month... Okay, so it's been 15 days in the demon realm for some reason, whether out of bashfulness or something else. Luo Binghe had never done anything too forward. Well, good. I'm glad he'd never done anything too forward. That shows a little smidgen of growth. Good. Yet at this time and in this location, the situation was completely different. The sun hadn't even set. Was sex in broad daylight really okay? Had he sheltered this child so much it broken him? Qing Jing was highly accustomed to being so close to someone while wide awake, but Luo Binghe was a porcelain doll who'd shatter at the slightest touch, and he would never survive another careless drop. So Qing Jing reciprocated Luo Binghe's actions and opened his mouth a little bit. See, that part there too, where he's like, I don't want to, break Luo Binghe, so I guess I'll just comply. Get some Gorilla Glue. Speaking of, something was strange. Qing Jing had been in this body for ages now. It had always felt like so, cold and feeling from head to toe no matter where he touched. Nothing tickled him regardless of where he was poked, and he seemed to have no sensitive spots. But as Luo Binghe needed him, the pressure, gentle yet varied, he felt nigh unbearable prickling itch. Is he, stealing his energy or something? Why is he so proficient? Why? Even though he's a virgin, why? Why? An instant expert after only one time? Well, how is this fair? I'm gonna sue. I'm gonna yell. Why? Luo Binghe nibbled on Qing Jing's lips while his tongue probed and prodded within Shin Qingqiu's mouth. Having difficulties keeping up with the pace, Shin Qingqiu began to pant faintly. However, whenever he moved his head away even a little, Luo Binghe pulled him back and kissed him even more deeply. Unable to catch his breath, his eyes squeezed shut in a frown, and Shin Qingqiu was naturally unable to see the malice flashing within Luo Binghe's gaze. As his perch on Luo Binghe's thigh was unsteady, he involuntarily reached out and grabbed at Luo Binghe's collar, but he missed the cloth and instead landed on the skin of Luo Binghe's chest. Here we go! The smooth, unblemished skin on his chest. In that moment, Shin Qingqiu's mind went as blank and white as snow. Then his palm suddenly exerted great force and he fired a spiritual blast at Luo Binghe's heart. Yes! Good! I was like, that can't be him. That's not him. Luo Binghe took this powerful surge of spiritual energy head on, but he remained utterly unaffected. With a cold laugh, he encircled Shin Qingqiu's right wrist with one hand, while continuing to press down on his nape with the other. Then he skillfully flipped them over, rolling them onto the bed together. Looking down at Shin Qingqiu from overhead, he smiled brightly. What's wrong, Shizun? Don't you love me very much? So why aren't you willing to give in to me? Well, go fuck yourself! Beat it! Spat Shin Qingqiu. Luo Binghe's lips and teeth went from gentle worrying to vicious biting, instantly filling Shin Qingqiu's mouth with the taste of blood. Why does Shin Qingqiu have to suffer? Shin Qingqiu formed a seal with his left hand, summoning Zhuya from where it lay on the table. When Luo Binghe's movement slightly slowed, Shin Qingqiu took the chance to kick upward and plant his foot against the impostor's chest. But he hadn't managed to get all the way up when something clamped down on his ankle. He looked back to see Luo Binghe's hand grasped there, at which point it abruptly yanked, dragging Shin Qingqiu back beneath him a second time. Right after, he forced Shin Qingqiu to straighten, then with his hand still clasped around Shin Qingqiu's calf, folding Shin Qingqiu's leg against his chest with a downward press. He accomplished this set of movements in a single breath. Where is he? Yelled Shin Qingqiu. Luo Binghe cocked his head. Who are you asking about? If it's me, aren't I right here? Now able to catch his breath, Shin Qingqiu asked, well, how did you end up here? Luo Binghe toyed with his hair. Well, for my part, I'm more curious as to how Shizun found me out. Motherfucker. There were sword scars on both Luo Binghe's palm and chest, once given to him by Shin Qingqiu himself. Do you really want to find out? Asked Shin Qingqiu. Luo Binghe lowered his body further and said, his voice chilly yet colored by a hint of provocation, it's fine if you don't want to say. We have plenty of time. Enough for me to slowly find out. Then why not take a look behind you? The curve on Luo Binghe's lips froze. Startled, he abruptly swiveled his head back, guard raised. A face exactly like his, partly illuminated and partly in shadow, rushed forward. That face was like snow, like frost, frigid down to the core, yet its eyes burned like ghost fire, the color a searing bloody crimson. Oh my God! So yeah, I want to know where's this imposter from and how did this happen, but dude, you're dead. You're dead. Luo Binghe is going to kill you. Bye. It's been nice knowing you. I'm glad we have another chapter. Chapter 84. Within the bamboo house were two identical people with the exact same face. Other than one being dressed in white and the other in black, there was not a single discernible difference between them. At the black-robed Luo Binghe's waist hung a sword sealed tightly within layers upon layers of paper talismans. Oh, to think that the once kingly Jinmo, overflowing with power and tyrannical energy, would end up bound in such a rough and unseemly manner, unable to release a single wisp of demonic energy. Well, good! We saw what happened the last time that happened. Luo Binghe's voice came in a hoarse but forceful whisper. Unhand him. A spiritual blast accompanied this quiet and enraged snarl. The white-robed Luo Binghe locked firmly between Shin Qingqiu's legs, promptly and decisively returned it. The two attacks met in midair with a harsh sound, scattering dust and smoke throughout the room. Luo Binghe wore an expression of incredible disappointment. You couldn't have returned a little earlier or a little later? He asked contemptuously. You just had to choose a time like this? He had yet to finish speaking when Shin Qingqiu curled his pointer and middle fingers, and Zhuya's hilt trembled slightly where the sword had stabbed into the wall and then flew into his hands. His grip clenched into a fist and he immediately swung his arm, chopping downward. Sandwiched between the two attacks, Luo Binghe finally couldn't maintain that provocative posture any longer. He flipped off the bed, not forgetting to give Shinshingcho's waist another squeeze before leaving, and then gracefully landed at the other end of the bamboo house. Shizun is so merciless with his attacks, he said, adopting a sad expression. Doesn't his heart hurt for his disciple even a little? Get the fuck out! Who's your Shizun? This guy was the male lead of Zhongdian stallion novel Proud Immortal Demon Way, the original flavor Luo Binghe. What? What? Previously, the system's punishment protocol had set him loose. This godly man who was admired by Zhongdian readers everywhere. On the forums, anyone who brought him up reverently uttered the same name, Binghe. Shinshingcho could never have anticipated that this guy would show up not only within the punishment protocol, but within the standard world as a real solid entity. All this given, it seemed like the system's so-called punishment hadn't just been setting a character simulation boost, hadn't just been setting a character simulation loose. It had directly pulled Binghe over from a parallel universe, one that belonged to the original novel. What? 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 Ever since the day before, Shinshingcho had nursed the vague feeling that something was off, but Maiden Luo had always been the type to kick up a fuss or act spoiled at the drop of a hat. Plus, he'd been anxious and concerned. Because he'd been anxious and concerned, Shinshingcho had only paid attention to treating his injuries and failed to give Luo Binghe's behavior careful thought. On the real Luo Binghe's palm and chest were sword scars that had been left by Shinshingcho himself. That child treasured even that kind of thing and refused to heal them, instead preserving them onto his body. How, therefore, could Shinshingcho have never ever get to touch smooth, unblemished skin? In the end, he and Luo Binghe were too unfamiliar with each other's bodies. And that was why it had taken him so long to figure out what was wrong here. 1,000 fortunes he had reined in right at the edge of the cliff. So close, he'd almost lost all integrity. There. At this point, that leave Luo Binghe had directed him the day before on their first encounter with the underground palace had been much easier to understand. The word hadn't meant, hurry up and run, I don't want to drag you down, but rather, get the fuck away from me, you scumbag piece of shit. The sword-carrying, black-robed Luo Binghe threw himself forward and said in a rush, Shizun, did that bastard do anything to you? Isn't calling him a bastard basically calling yourself one? It was only a roast for the sake of roasting. Shinshingcho looked at Luo Binghe's face, at its brimming urgency as he clung to him, unwilling to let go, and felt deeply relieved. Now this was how Luo Binghe should be. Fair enough. Shinshingcho cleared his throat, confirming his clothes were neither torn nor crooked and his appearance was all in place before saying, this master is fine. He suddenly recalled how the day before the other Luo Binghe's body had been covered in wounds, his skin split and bleeding. He feared that this one might not have been left unscathed. Irony, he asked, what about you? Are you injured? Luo Binghe nodded. It's all healed already. Shinshingcho grabbed his wrist and flipped it over. Upon his palm was a white scar that could be called neither faint nor clear. Shinshingcho's heart stirred at the sight. What happened exactly? Where have you been these last 2 days? Why is he here? Luo Binghe shook his head. This disciple doesn't know. The day before yesterday, I secluded myself within the underground palace's inner halls when Jinmo's fragments unexpectedly glowed purple. And then this person appeared. And in his hand was another Jinmo. I exchanged blows with him, but in a moment of carelessness, I entered one of Jinmo's rifts, which sealed closed behind me. I only had enough time to swipe the sword from him. When I returned, I couldn't find Shizun, so I could only head to Sangzhong Mountain. So for the past 2 days, Luo Binghe had been in Proud Immortal Demon Way's original world, and Jinmo's space-severing slash was already at heaven-defying levels of OP. Its slashes could slice apart even the space between parallel universes? That was no longer something you could explain away by calling it a mere bug. And now, a homegrown green JJ Gay had found himself in one of Zongdian's uncountable harems of beauties. What? The child must have been frightened out of his wits. Shinshingcho couldn't help the tender fondness that welled up within his heart. What? Okay. But suddenly he heard a voice say coldly, "Excuse me, I'm still here. Could you not leave me hanging?" The original Luo Binghe was used to forever being at the center of everyone's attention. Watching this duo jump on each other at first sight, thoroughly ignoring his existence, and being all cloying and disgusting, filled him with an unspeakable irritation. With a subtle burst of force from his foot, he soundlessly smashed several of the stones beneath it into a fine powder. Luo Binghe shielded Shinshingcho behind him, his tone ominous. "What were you just doing now?" "Just playing around," the other Luo Binghe said mildly. Shinshingcho was stunned silent. Playing around with who? Playing around with me? Binghe, you'd accept all comers? Welcoming both men and women? Is this something like both meat and fish are fine? I'm not picky, I'll eat whatever I'm given? So it's now like the OG Luo Binghe is bisexual? Why not? Why not? Or was it because this Luo Binghe had failed to collect even a single member of the original harem, leaving the other Luo Binghe deprived until he couldn't take it any longer? Oh my god. We're getting into like why is this a multiverse? Why is this story the multiverse? I shouldn't be surprised, but why? What? Binghe humped. "Well, who made you so useless?" he asked disdainfully. "To think you have not a single woman." Oh, okay, that's old Luo Binghe to him. His standard for uselessness was practically a drunkard's, but Luo Binghe's focus wasn't on this at all. In his fury, he's not even paying attention to the harem comment. In his fury, scarlet blood seemed to drip from his eyes, and he said sharply, "Will you dare to humiliate Shizun like this?" The other Luo Binghe's eyes was also flooded with crimson as he met that gaze and sneered. "How was I humiliating him? Look at that worthless appearance of yours. To think you'd be so unsightly when you're also Luo Binghe. You even spend all day messing around with Shinshingcho, that depraved degenerate." He had yet to finish his sentence when Luo Binghe exploded. Dark Shi suffused the interior of the bamboo house to the point that one couldn't have seen their hand in front of their face. Neither protagonist was willing to yield an inch, but then a ray of white light lanced in from above. It appeared that while throwing spiritual blasts around haphazardly, the poor rafters in the bamboo house ceiling had suffered undue collateral damage. A large hole had been blown open. Luo Binghe raised his head and gazed upward, his face darker than even the demonic energy he'd been firing. Shinshingcho had approximately the same expression. "Motherfucker, how are we supposed to explain when Qing Peak comes to make repairs? Oh, just leave it to Shang Qinghua. He'll understand. It's his story." Luo Binghe was unwilling to destroy the bamboo house. He jumped out the door and yelled, "Come out here!" The original flavor humphed perfect. I wasn't able to let loose inside that run-down little house. The two silhouettes, one black and one white, vanished in an instant. Meanwhile, Shinshingcho pondered whether calling Baizon Peak would result in them trying to kill both Luo Binghes indiscriminately. At this moment, Mingfan and Ning Yingying rushed in with a group of disciples behind them. By Shinshingcho's guess, they'd been doing their evening reading when they heard the strange noises and hurried over. Some of them were carrying Guquin, while the others held books. "Halt," said Shinshingcho. The entire group of disciples quickly stood at attention. Mingfan opened his mouth to ask, "Shizun, what is going on here?" "Line up," Shinshingcho interrupted. The Qing Jing Peak's disciples lined up promptly as if by reflex. "Go down and run laps around Qing Jing Peak, 30 of them." If Shinshingcho tried to shoo them away after letting them know what was going on, these kids would unquestionably refuse. They'd even insist on staying, or to make a mess. Better than just to shoo them off before they reached that point. Just as he had issued such a direct command, all the disciples all looked at one another. If their Shizun wanted them to run, they would run. A group of teal-robed boys and girls ran down Qing Jing Peak in a trailing conga line, one after the other. Now that he'd directed them away, Shinshingcho let out a sigh of relief. Then he turned around, taking off towards the bamboo forest at the back of the mountain. While the original flavor Luo Binghe had complete control over Jinmo, the Luo Binghe who Shinshingcho had raised, whether due to an unstable psyche or surplus of distracting thoughts, was prone to suffering its recoil and psychic assaults. Therefore, the latter was probably leery of carelessly handling Jin Mo, meaning his hands were somewhat tied. It was likely for this exact reason that he'd taken the initiative to bind and seal the blade with paper talismans. Holding a golden finger while being too afraid to use it was like holding a golden bowl but being unable to ask for rice. With the sword still in its sheath, they seemed to have engaged in a brawl. But this brawl was packing away too much destructive power. Dozens of yawning ditches had already been gouged into the ground. Bamboo toppled and sent fallen leaves scattering, while roosting birds soared into the sky with frightened cries. If this continued, the clear and tranquil Qing Jing Peak was going to end up shaved into a bald-headed Tuding Peak. The second he spied a gap between the two, Xingqiu prompted Zhu Ya to lunge at the original flavor with a shriek. Silvery lights sparked back and forth as the blade streaked toward narrowed eyes. The other Luo Binghe abruptly moved his head and flicked the sword away, and then asked with his head still cocked, "We're clearly the same person, so why does Shizun help him but hurt me?" Well, like, fuck, you're the same person! The Luo Binghe he'd raised was an eccentric maiden Luo, aka Bing Mei. Oh, whose story, following Xingqiu's plot interference, had, by the system's grace, been reshuffled onto the green JJ's Donmai page. Oh, so it's all inside stuff. We'll talk about this in the discussion. He wasn't a Zongdian stallion novel male like this guy, with his cool badassery oozing out of every pore and his head full of vulgar thoughts, who'd farmed and leveled up low IQ villains and side characters. No, he's nothing like you at all. Xingqiu kept his mouth shut and didn't answer. He met gazes with Luo Binghe, and without needing any further words, they attacked the original as one. From the beginning, there hadn't been much difference in power between the two Luo Binghes. The original's injuries had mostly been due to Luo Binghe hacking at him. With the addition of Xingqiu, the balance slowly tipped. Amidst sword glares as snow-white and airy as soaring dragons, spiritual energy and black qi roiled and intertwined, working seamlessly in concert. The original Luo Binghe narrowly avoided several waves of attacks and squinted a little. He seemed angry, but not enough to express his emotions further, only pursing his mouth. Suddenly he said, "With technique that bad, what's so good about him anyway?" When this line came out of nowhere, Xingqiu's hand trembled a little. But he forced it down and continued attacking. Unfortunately, Binghe refused to restrain himself. "Shizun, you've already experienced my prowess. Since we're the same person, why not come with me? I'll definitely give you more pleasure than he could." "Shut up," snapped Xingqiu. "Already experienced," mothered Luo Binghe. "Concentrate on the fight," said Xingqiu. Oh my god. What does he mean by already experienced? What does he mean by more pleasure than he could? Or perhaps, the original said ambiguously, Shizun actually likes it when it hurts. Even if that's the case, this disciple guarantees that he could satisfy you. In that instant, Luo Binghe's face twisted. In what seemed an unconscious action, he placed his hand on Jin Mo. "Don't drawl it!" Xingqiu urgently yelled. Only then did Luo Binghe come back to himself. He removed his hand right away, but the crimson of his eyes became even more intense, and his breathing quickened as well. He gritted his teeth and threw himself forward, taking the initiative to shift the close quarters combat. In a direct brute force confrontation, as their power and level and techniques were identical, the consequences they suffered were twinned as well. Xingqiu heard a muffled crack. One Luo Binghe had broken his left arm, the other his right. Both limbs now dangled limply. Their reactions were also the same. With their arms broken, they kicked, and so another cracking noise sounded. This time it was their legs. Xingqiu couldn't take it anymore. Enough! If they went on fighting like this, did they intend to perish together? The original's expression suddenly gentled as he looked at Xingqiu. "Shizun, do you blame me for making things too painful last time?" So it is the same one as earlier. Okay, I was going to contemplate that. Luo Binghe went wide-eyed. "Shizun, you've met him before?" If an encounter in the system counted as a meeting, then that was a yes. Not wanting to give a half-hearted answer, Xingqiu said it was only a chance meeting. Binghe really knew how to push someone's buttons. "It was my fault," he said last time. "It was my fault last time," he said mournfully. "This disciple admits his wrongdoings, but just now, didn't Shizun find my touch most pleasurable? We're both your disciples, so how can you bear to treat me like this? Oh, fake, you faker! You're still faking! As expected of Binghe, that two-faced backstabber with his honeyed tongue and belly full of knives, who could smile all and agree with you while stabbing you 1,000 times in the heart. The male leads in Zongdian's grimdark works were truly sinister. By taking this track, he was obviously trying to disrupt Luo Binghe's focus. Of course, Qingqiu couldn't let him succeed. He snapped back, his words unambiguous and full of righteousness. It wasn't pleasurable in the slightest. The second after he spat these words, a powerful numbing wave of heat surged within his belly. It was impossible to ignore and impossible to suppress. The blood, as if thousands of ants were sluggishly crawling about inside his body. The corner of Luo Binghe's lips twitched upward as he said, cheerful and ominous, "Oh, you still insist on lying about your feelings?" Heavenly demon blood. How could he forget? As long as... what? As long as it was Luo Binghe, he could control the blood mites within Xingqiu's body. Now that's just bullshit. That doesn't make any sense. This is a totally different parallel universe. What? MXTX. That's a plot contrivance. Two Luo Binghe suppressing him. Two Luo Binghes openly competed with one another, one agitating the blood mites, the other suppressing them. And the result was that numbing weakness, and that prickling heat ebbed and flowed through Xingqiu, coming in waves as they rapidly spread from his abdomen to his entire body, even to his fingertips. Xingqiu gulped a couple of painful breaths. His vision blurred, and the hand holding his sword began to tremble. The moment Luo Binghe was distracted, the Jinmo at his waist was snatched away. The original flavor gave them a gleeful smile, a hint of bloodthirsty excitement within it. Right as he grasped the hilt, ready to draw the sword from its sheath, Xingqiu suddenly said coldly, "Well, don't celebrate too early. Look above you." At this moment, the only things above their heads were rustling twigs and leaves of bamboo, swaying and undulating in the wind. The original didn't need to raise his head to tell that there was no threat that waited above him, and he smiled slightly. "Shizun, that sort of ploy is for dealing with little children. Trying to trick your disciple that way is a bit too condescending." "You won't look? All right, you brought this upon yourself." Xingqiu formed a seal with his left hand and crisply snapped his fingers, his expression hardening. The original was about to say something when a fluttering leaf streaked across his vision. The smile on his face froze. A fine trickle of blood slowly dripped down his cheek. All around him, bamboo leaves fell more and more thickly until the leisurely drifting foliage suddenly sped up, and each one slicing toward where he stood in the center like a frigid, cutting wind from the east. Plucking leaves, flying flowers, ultimate version, 100 leaves, 1,000 flowers! What? The original Luo Binghe flung out his palm, routing the dense assault of leafy razors, but for Xingqiu, the entire forest was full of ammunition. Thick with leaves that rained down like confetti, homing in on their target in hot pursuit, though they appeared to be unassuming. With a single touch they could carve flesh from bone. A leaf or two could be dodged, but hundreds upon thousands blotting out the sky as they enveloped a target was inevitably enough to fluster anyone. On top of that, the original had broken both an arm and a leg during his crude duel earlier, hampering his mobility. Xingqiu was about to take his bullying further when a black shadow stole in front of him. With his remaining good hand, that figure struck the original Luo Binghe square in the chest. A look of disbelief flashed over that impossibly familiar face. And in that instant, Xingqiu actually found it all somewhat unbearable. The original backed up 2 steps, his throat bobbing as if he'd swallowed a mouthful of blood. "How harmonious," he sneered. "Not bad, His words were mocking, but his good hand had already clenched into a fist, his veins faintly bulging. Since he'd come of age, no one had ever managed to push him this far. Being at such a disadvantage reminded him of the days when he'd been persecuted and humiliated, trampled over in all kinds of ways. The hot tea spilled upon his head, the cold and drafty woodshed, the relentless beating fists, the verbal abuse, the kneeling that lasted from blazing afternoon in the dead of the night, the paucity of his meals. And connected to those days via 1,000 inseparable threads was the face before him. But right now, that face's owner stood beside a person identical to him, cradling his double's broken arm, too afraid to touch it but also too worried to let go. As if he himself could feel the pain. Shinshingqiu frowned. Why did you fight him head on? And you kept fighting even though you knew your arm was broken. Don't be so reckless next time. It was a scolding, but the tone wasn't just urgent and upset. It was anguished and full of heartache. Even an idiot could hear that. A chill wind blew through the forest, rustling the foliage. Leaves drifted down one by one. It was so infuriating and so unfair. The image of the two of them standing together was so glaring that in his eyes it began to hurt, the rims prickling with heat. Even though they were both Luo Binghe. For what reason had that one been able to meet this sort of Shinshingqiu? Well, the other had only met a rotten bastard, vindictive, petty, and jealous to the core. For what reason? The carefully preserved clothes and belonging, the pristine and tidy side room, the gentle whispers, the boundless doting and indulgence. He'd only wanted to humiliate them, because that disgusting relationship of theirs elicited nothing but his contempt, and yet the "come with me" that left his mouth in that instant was involuntary, and it was addressed to Shinshingqiu. Luo Binghe heard those words and sneered. What did you say, huh? His knuckles cracked, and from the looks of it, they had triggered a killing rage. It was true that Shinshingqiu approved of finishing people off. He was a big fan of finishing things off. But if he had Luo Binghe kill the other Luo Binghe, exactly what would they be doing here? Then again, if Shinshingqiu were to land the killing blow himself, well, that was even more unthinkable. Furthermore, what if the law that the male lead has plot armor was still in effect with regards to the original Binghe? Shinshingqiu pressed down on his Luo Binghe's shoulders with 2 fingers, telling him to calm down. As he was racking his brain as to how to deal with this, the original Luo Binghe moved first. He slapped away Jinmo's paper seals. Dark chi and purple light surged forth, and with the other 2 still on full alert, he cut a dimension-severing slash, opened a spatial rift and leapt inside. As he looked back, he viciously bit his lips, so infuriating. Then the rift vanished, together with his figure, and just like that, he was gone. Had he been that easy to defeat? Though he was frozen for a while, Shinshingqiu finally recovered. Head back and destroy Jinmo's fragments this instant. You can't keep something like that around. The bugs in that thing's code were way too serious. If they held onto it, who knew what kind of ridiculous development it would stir up next? Okay, all right, oh my god. Luo Binghe silently nodded. Though he probably didn't need anyone's support, Shinshingqiu continued to lend him one of his arms to lean on. They'd barely walked a single step when Luo Binghe said mournfully, Shizun, is my technique really that awful? Ah. To be honest, it was indeed awful. Like, really awful. Regardless of whether it was a matter of kissing, touching, stripping, or rolling around, the difference was far more than a few levels. And when it came to thrusting, well, he hadn't had the chance to compare, but if one followed this line of logic, it would also be a fail. Obviously, Shinshingqiu wouldn't say these words. Instead, he skirted around it with a, oh, well, not really. The gloom on Luo Binghe's face grew heavier and heavier. After all, you don't have much experience, Shinshingqiu consoled him. Binghe's skills had been honed through fighting hundreds of battles and having trysts with hundreds of women. Luo Binghe's head drooped. From the look of it, he was probably contemplating squatting in some corner to grow mushrooms again. More than anything, Shinshingqiu couldn't just stand watching Luo Binghe in one of these moods. This master will treat your arm and leg first, and once they're healed, we can do some exploring together, he said in a coaxing tone. How about that? Luo Binghe abruptly jerked his head up. Really? Shinshingqiu had known that he would react like this and calmly patted his head. Treatment first. Luo Binghe nodded, and then with 2 cracks, he slotted his arm and leg back into place. He instantly straightened, using his perfectly whole hands to grasp Shinshingqiu's arm, a soft flush rising to his cheeks and his eyes sparkled. I'm healed! Shizun, let's do some exploring? Oh my god, we another chapter to go, but that's got to be next week. We need to go back. Oh my God, MXTX, what the fudge? And we need to talk about this. So the first lesson that I have learned from volume 4 is wait till you've read the whole chapter set before passing judgment, because I was like, this entire chapter set, it went, okay, I think I know where we're going. Something's off. I think there's another Luo Binghe. It's not Luo Binghe. And then it was like, wait, what? and then it came back up again. And I was like, oh, that's what MXTX is trying to do with this, is to illustrate the dynamic. And we're going to be doing that through various stories in this volume. And I'm like, okay, all right, MXTX, I'll play. I was talking with the moderators about this, and I feel like the moderators were like, they felt that at the end of volume 3, MXTX was like, yeah, that ending seemed kind of rushed, and it didn't really portray Luo Binghe and Xinqingqiu as having the best dynamic as a couple. And so if I were MXTX, I don't blame her for being like, I want to go back, and now that this is a Donmai technically, explore their relationship and develop it further. And I'm like, and I'm glad she's doing that. I'm glad volume 4 exists for that reason. So I've updated the board, as it would be, to showcase the things that I didn't know. I don't know if the B points are going to be relevant. I didn't think that anything was going to come about that original Luo Binghe punishing Xinqingqiu, but we're going to talk about it and the system in this because it has implications in this chapter. I was like, oh shit. But I didn't think anything about it. So I don't know if the B points are relevant anymore, but here they are. We still technically had 3,080 B points last time we checked. There were heartbreak points were 4,500, anger points were 1,500. I don't know if they're relevant anymore. I'm just going to keep them up in the corner to see. Who knows? Also, that binding rope is still there, and I don't know if it's going to be relevant, but we didn't use it. We used the jade pendant, but not the binding rope, so maybe it will be relevant. Who knows? Xinqingqiu should keep a hold of it in case he needs to use it on Luo Binghe. Also, our goals have changed. Look, we know that Luo Binghe and Xinqingqiu like each other. It's mutual. We know that. But I think my goals for volume 4 are, can we get to a healthy relationship between the two of them? And that will require some work on Luo Binghe. It's going to be a fix-it volume. And I don't like fix-it volumes because I don't like the concept of fixing someone. I don't like that because, you should like a person for who they are. But if that person has some flaws that are inherently leading to a possibly unhealthy relationship, then they need to work on that. And they need to fix themselves to be worthy of the person that they care about. So, for example, I've read a lot of BL where one person in the relationship is a little bit unhealthy, not necessarily toxic maybe, but they're unhealthy in the relationship. And the other person's like, okay, I'm done. I'm fed up with you. You're going to have to do some growing up and then come back. And I will use Given as a great example. There are some characters in my calendar here. There are some characters in Given, mainly these two, who in Given, one of the characters, he does some stuff and makes some boo-boos. And the other character goes, you know what? I'm going to back off till you fix yourself and you take care of yourself and then you come back. And you know what he does? He takes care of himself, and then he comes back being like, I had to mature and grow up to be worthy of your love. And it's like the most romantic thing ever because that's a healthy thing for people to do. And so because of that, I've got on here goals for these bakas. What I want this volume to do. You may notice there's only one Xinqingqiu thing because there's only one Xinqingqiu thing. The rest of this is all Luo Binghe stuff he needs to be working on. For Xinqingqiu, he does need to be more open and communicative with Luo Binghe. And he was being in this chapter set. So he needs to be more open and communicative with Luo Binghe. Also about his boundaries, right? He needs to be more communicative, being like, hey, this is how this is. Now, let's talk about this. Neither of these characters want to talk. And it's frustrating because in the other two MXTX stories, they do talk quite a bit. In Modao Zushi, somebody on that Reddit thread had said that Modao Zushi was problematic too. And I was like, here's the deal. Without spoiling anything, Wei Wuxian and Lan Wangji are kinky, but it is consensual, and they're both down for it, and they communicate about it. Those are the three big things. You've got to be consensual, communicative, and you have to be secure within yourself to be understanding for all of that to take place. And they are. And it works in that story because of that communication. In Heaven Official's Blessing, the two characters, they go through some conflicts, but they communicate through them and they work it out. And it's a healthy relationship. These two Bakas are getting there. They do it more in this chapter set, and I'm proud of them. We'll talk about it. I'm glad they're communicating a little bit. We just need more of it. We need more of it, right? So Shinjincho needs to be more open and communicative about his boundaries, right? He also needs to be more open about himself because Luo Binghe, and this is kind of the problem that Shinjincho has, that a lot of people will give him grief, and a lot of people have given him grief in the comments. They've been like, well, Luo Binghe, you know, he doesn't know about Shinjincho being Xinyan. And I'm like, yeah, but Xinyan can't tell him. He's not going to know what to do with that information or believe him. So it's kind of like, it's the one special circumstance, like in reality, you're never going to go up to your partner and go, hey, I transmigrated here. Like, you're never going to say that. I mean, you could say that, but it's not true. And if it is true, we need to know about that. So you need to be sharing that down below. But you can't tell your partner stuff like that. Like, that's the fantasy. That's the not realistic part. So you kind of have to separate that from the whole thing, because Shinjincho cannot tell him that he's transmigrated. I mean, I guess after this volume chapter set, maybe he could, since we just went into parallel universes and multiverse theory. I'm like, I guess he could tell him that, but then, you know, here's the thing. Shinjincho knows that our little baby Labrador is like a little glass egg, you know, a little ornate glass Fabergé egg, that if he tells him remotely anything that's going to unbalance him, he's going to like, oh, and collapse. And then Shinjincho's like, I got to deal with the mess because he's a brat. So maybe not brat's not, but he can be a child. And so he's like, I've got to clean up the diapers if I get too crazy with it. So he can't tell him that he's from another universe, or else Luo Binghe will probably be like, well, then have you ever trusted me? And it was like, no, none of that shit. Before we get to that, I would like to if we got to the point where Shinjincho could tell Luo Binghe that he was from another dimension and explain all that to him without him having an emotional breakdown, that would be amazing. But Luo Binghe's got to do some things first. So in this volume, I would like for Luo Binghe to, one, don't manipulate Shinjincho. Stop it. Don't manipulate him. He hasn't done it this volume yet, but we'll talk about it. The original Luo Binghe did, but he hasn't. So we need to make sure he doesn't do that. Two, he needs to communicate with Shinjincho's friends nicely. As in, don't try to kill them. So we'll talk about this as well. But here's the thing. I know we'll talk about Liu Qingge in this. Liu Qingge did throw the punch saying that they were going to ban Luo Binghe from coming there. That is mean. That was uncalled for. I'm a little bit mad that Liu Qingge did that. He should not have done that. If I were Luo Binghe, I would be mad about that, and he has every right to be. But Luo Binghe needs to be the better person and sit down with Liu Qingge, and Shinjincho needs to be a mediator, sit between them and be like, okay, the three of us, we need to talk. Because it's very clear that Shinjincho likes Liu Qingge. I'm not saying romantically, but it's very clear that they're friends, that they get along. And Liu Qingge definitely likes Shinjincho. Liu Qingge really likes Shinjincho. Now, if we establish Shinjincho as an unreliable narrator, and when Shinjincho's like, oh, Liu Qingge just keeps giving me my fan back, isn't that something? Do we interpret that as Liu Qingge knows, or Shinjincho knows that Liu Qingge likes him? Do we interpret it as that? Because that would seem to be, if we're following the same logic of him being an unreliable narrator, that means he knows. Or do we treat it as he's being oblivious? But Liu Qingge needs to be honest and communicate. Shinjincho needs to be honest and sit down between them and they all communicate. And Luo Binghe needs to understand that he can't be the type of boyfriend that doesn't let his partner see other people and have friends. Like, that's not fair, and that's not right, and that's not healthy. So luckily, none of that happened this chapter set because it was OG Binghe, which we'll talk about. But I'm hoping that this volume, it was a thing in volume 3. So I do hope that it's something that's addressed and that they at least come to terms. Or at least, at the very least, Liu Qingge and Luo Binghe come to terms, because they both are important to Xin Qingqiu. They're both required in Xin Qingqiu's life, so they need to be able to coexist. That needs to happen. 3 is that Luo Binghe needs to understand Xin Qingqiu's boundaries, and he does do a really good job with that. I'm going to give him credit. So we're going to talk about this chapter set. He does do that, so I want to see that more, but good. Good, Luo Binghe. Good boy. So then 4, don't make Xin Qingqiu cave to get you to have your way, and basically be more mature. And he has done that in the past. He does. Xin Qingqiu talks a little bit about that at the beginning of here. I want to make sure that doesn't happen in this volume. 5, he needs to treat Xin Qingqiu with trust and open kindness. That does happen in this chapter, so we're going to talk about that. So yay, good. And then finally, they need to build a consensual consummation. They need to be openly enjoying it. And by that, I mean that Luo Binghe does not need to guilt trip Xin Qingqiu into being intimate. And we'll talk about that in this chapter set. But I will say, Luo Binghe, here's the thing. And I know what you all are going to say in the comments, because I was judging. And Luo Binghe has this tendency, MXTX has this tendency to make you get mad at Luo Binghe, but then immediately realize that it's not Luo Binghe's fault. And you're like, shit, I got caught in it, right? But on the flip side, Luo Binghe does do a lot of things that are immature and would warrant you to have that behavior. So you kind of get caught up, and it's sort of like Luo Binghe tries to guilt you into being like, well, look, you got mad at me for no reason. I'm like, but you have been like that. So we'll talk about this chapter set, but I was really, really pleasantly surprised. There was a moment where I was not liking this chapter set at all, and I was like, because Be Happy was like, this is my second favorite volume after volume 1, and I was like, is it? But then we reached a turning point, and I'll talk about the turning point when we get to it, and I was like, oh, okay, now MXTX has revealed what the chapter set is actually doing and turned it around, and I really like it. So I ended up really liking this chapter set. It's just you had to go on a roller coaster to get there, and I'm like, I've learned from week one to not get too far into the discussion. I was starting to get into the discussion as we went into the chapter, and then things would happen a few pages later that would contradict what I thought, and I was like, oh, well, I got to take that back and reverse it. So I think from now on, the plan is I will just read the chapter straightforward, make minimal commentary until we're all done, and then we can go back and talk about it as a whole. That will make more sense, because otherwise I'm going to be triggered by my immediate reflex to react and be reactionary and not let the chapter sink in, which it will need to, right? So, as far as the titles of these chapters, Reiki has it pulled up. I'm going to see what our first chapter is. Chapter 82, the ultimate showdown between Bing Mei and Binghe, 1, and then 2 and 3. So I don't know what chapter 85 is called. We will find out next week, along with part 23, which is chapter 86. We'll find that out as we go. It's fine. But yeah, I'm like, anyway. So we'll just see that next week. That's fine. But I was because I feel like at one point earlier on in the story, I thought that they called current Luo Binghe Binghe. I thought they called him that at some point in the story. So for the longest time, the whole Binghe thing was throwing me off. And I was like, who the hell's Bing Mei? But now it makes sense because, Binghe is the original flavor, right? Kind of like Shinju is the original flavor of Xin Qingqiu. Binghe is the same thing. Bing Mei refers to Don Mai refers to that, where Bing Mai is Don Mai. So that's why it's Bing Mai. So I was like, oh, not May, but Mai. I was like, oh, okay, now it makes sense. Great. So we also need to establish in this, and I hope I'm speaking loud enough for the mic to pick me up, but we also need to talk about the world building. That's something as well in this. Should be established as well. But man, MXTX, I did not expect this first set of chapters for the extras to be as mysterious as they were. Really like it. So they go to Sanjiang Mountain after they left Sanjiang Mountain after being chased out by everybody. They go to the headquarters at the northern part of the demon realm. And of course, it's where Shinshingcho had his house arrest back at the start of volume 3. We're back again. And I really like the idea that there's the bamboo and it's all grown up and it looks kind of like it did it at Qing Jing Peak, which is nice. I like that. It's like a little touch of home and, you know, bringing a little bit of Qing Jing Peak there. So the first 10 or so days after their arrival, Luo Binghe clung to Shinshingcho that he couldn't be swatted off. But the last few days, he started to show some restraint and suddenly became courteous. So basically he said it was like 15 days. So it was half a month. Okay, that's fine. That establishes the timeline. That all makes sense. So Luo Binghe had been clingy, but slacked off. He slacked off and started to become courteous. All right. And there was this conflict at the northern and southern borders. So he basically went to go take care of that. And so, but Shinshingcho thinks that the real reason is that they're not sleeping in the same bed. And so thus it hurt his feelings. Now, at this point, something that Shinshingcho is notorious for doing is that he is not a reliable narrator. He leaves things out. He doesn't tell the audience certain things. So you kind of are left as the audience going, is he leaving anything out or is he twisting his words? What is he saying? There seems to be this, he's like, I'm refusing Luo Binghe out of habit, but I would have agreed if he pestered me a little bit more. And I'm like, you're just as bad as he is. I was like, stop it. But he's like, you know, he's like, who knew? Who would have guessed that after a mere wave of his hand, Luo Binghe would rush out the door to go find a corner to grow mushrooms in. So he'd probably gone to decide over to the inner hall. So again, I feel like at first I was kind of mad about it because I was like, I didn't want Shinshingcho to be guilt tripped into intimacy. I don't like when people are guilt tripped into intimacy, being like, well, you don't like me. That's all. It's like, no, stop that. Don't be that way. Communicate or stop. But that is not maybe the case. What he doesn't know and what we, the audience, doesn't know is that Luo Binghe had gotten in a fight with Binghe. And that's what prompted this. So a lot of what we see at the beginning is just Shinshingcho's conjecture, which is not reliable at all. So you're like, okay, fine. So he goes into the hall to figure out what's going on. And that's when Luo Binghe shows up. But it's not Bing Mei. It's not Bing Mai. It's Binghe, right? And so he has all of these like cuts and everything on him, and him asking Shinshingcho to leave makes sense because he thinks that it's Shinshingcho from earlier, and he's like, well, you wouldn't want nothing to do with me because you know that here's the thing, we established that he is the one from the punishment version. He's the one that punished Shinshingcho back when he traded in the points. So that begs an interesting question. So apparently the system has the ability to utilize versions of the characters from alternate versions. Well, that just flippin' opens up everything. If you can have characters from alternate universes come in at any point in time during the series, there's no limit. There is no limit to what you could do with the combinations of these characters. And on the one hand, that's really freaking cool. The idea that there could be other characters the system could transport you into the dreams involving characters from other parallel universes. That's really cool because I'm assuming that's what it was. It was used during like the dream sequences or certain punishments or phases. Okay, great. On the one hand, that's really cool. On the other hand, I'm not going to lie to you all. I don't like crossovers. In series, I like my series to stay a little bit separated. I think it's fun sometimes in the Discord to like show fan art and stuff that crosses over, but if I'm reading fan fiction, my brother's a huge crossover person. I'm like, I kind of like, it's like when you're a kid and you don't want to mix your food on your plate. I'm like, I don't want to mix these. that opens up a lot of possibilities, endless possibilities, and that's a little overwhelming to me right now. I was like, that's a sensory overload. The fact that you could have infinite possibilities of these characters from various versions of the story all like interacting with one another, because then, you know, what about it's like a butterfly effect. There's just different versions everywhere, and there could be like thousands of versions of Shin-Ching-Cho and thousands of versions of Luo Binghe based on the choose your own adventure. That's really what it is. This whole damn story is a choose your own adventure. So every choice Shin-Ching-Cho has made, or Shin-Yan has made in the form of Shin-Ching-Cho, there's probably another version where a different choice was made, and that's created another parallel universe. That's too much. It's too much to think about. It's like, nope, it's infinite. You could go on and on and on. So it's like, but they do establish that this Binghe is the one that punished him. And so he's confused because he's like, what the hell? Because he's used to Shin-Ching-Cho being an asshole. And so he's not used to Shin-Ching-Cho like being kind to him and giving him his energy and taking him to Sangjiang Mountain. He's not used to it. And the funny thing is at the very beginning, you assume, because Shin-Ching-Cho has been nice before, but you also assume because Luo Binghe's been a brat in reality, that this is normal behavior. Well, now it makes more sense as well, because the whole thing with Ming Fan, well, the original Binghe killed him. So when he glares at Ming Fan originally, that's because he kills him in the original version. That's why he glares at him. And Ming Fan's like, what the fudge? It also explains why he calls her Ying Ying, because in the OG version, he has a much closer relationship to her. So that's why he calls her that. And she gets on to him. She's like, silly Luo Binghe, what are you doing? Aren't you going to clean the house? And he's just like, the fudge, which we'll touch on in a second. And he doesn't know Liu Qingge because he died in the original version. So it all makes sense now. And the moment that he kind of acted a little bit strange, I was like, that doesn't seem like Luo Binghe. I was thinking, and y'all will laugh at this, I was thinking that somehow Luo Binghe had created like a dew mushroom, or like another demon had created a dew mushroom version and like had made it look like Luo Binghe, but it was someone else. I thought it was going along like a clone route, which it is. It's just not the clone that I thought it was. So it's really funny. I do also love that Liu Qingge, as soon as he sees or thinks that Luo Binghe is near, he's like, it's time to come and just insert myself into the situation. But anyway, it's like, okay, everything's in place. And so Luo Binghe being silent and looking around and seeing everything all makes sense. I think what was confusing me from suspecting that this was the OG Binghe is in the punishment, that Binghe was used to the entire Sangjiang Mountain being razed to the ground, and he had caused it. So I was a little bit curious how this version almost seemed at first more innocent and trickstery than the original Binghe that we saw in the punishment version seemed really gloomy and sad and like really depressed. And like everything was a story, and he's like, I don't care anymore. And he just whittles Shin-Ching-Cho into a human stick for his own like pleasure in that moment. So it seemed like a different version of Luo Binghe than the one that was presented in this. And this version seemed more innocent. So I was kind of confused on the direction that they were taking, and the characterization didn't quite match up for me. And plus, it was the OG Binghe. He seemed way too innocent compared to like the great stallion novel protagonist with the 300 wives. But we only know about the original Binghe from the punishment scene and Shin-Ching-Cho's narrative, so we don't have that full picture of him anyway. But yeah. And so Shin-Ching-Cho, of course, like, sweeps his hands around him and everything and sleeps next to him. And Luo Binghe is just kind of like, the fudge are we doing? And he's like, what's wrong with you? And he's like, well, just because. And then that's when Shin-Ching-Cho says, you know, we've reached this point and you're still throwing a tantrum. The simple fact that I wouldn't sleep with you for 2 days ago was long enough to make you this angry for this long. And Luo Binghe's like, sleep with you? And here's the thing. We contemplated several chapters ago, if, especially with the Shinju chapters, if the original Luo Binghe was also gay, it was just repressed and kept in the closet, technically, and he had all of the harem wives just as a front for how he really feeled, and maybe he did like the original, Shinju, but Shinju was so tortured from his trauma and so twisted by it that neither of them, they both were so twisted by their own trauma and actions towards each other that it got so toxic that they weren't able to forge a relationship. So now that he's in this world with this Shinchingcho that's Shinyan, he sees the chance to have that moment, and maybe that's it. So, there's that possibility of, I said bisexual in the reaction, but honestly, it could be that Binghe gets to act out his true sexuality with Shinyan's Shinchingcho. Right? We'll see. But yeah, so they forbid Luo Binghe to come, and I like that Shinchingcho later on went over to be like, that's a stupid rule, let's change that. So, but yeah, so anyway, he's like, did those demonic monsters stage a revolt? And then he's like, well, they might have. I like that Shinchingcho looks over at Luo Binghe being like, I don't really want to talk about my boyfriend's secret affairs. I don't want to tell you because I feel like he doesn't want to confirm what Liu Qingge is thinking about him. So he's like, well, I mean, he might have. And Liu Qingge is like, sure. And so he's like, well, then continue protecting him. Here's the thing. Liu Qingge has a crush on Shinchingcho. And I feel for him because there is a part of me that kind of ships Shinchingcho with Liu Qingge because on paper, Liu Qingge, he likes Shinchingcho. He's a tsundere, but he's a yandere. So it's not too far off. And he has helped Shinchingcho. He's tried to be there for him. He's respected his boundaries and let him have his space. He's letting him stay with him, even though he knows that he's a brat and maybe not the best for him. And he's like, you could do better. But he's letting him be with him because he knows he loves him. Liu Qingge is a great partner and is mature. He's got he's got a temper towards Luo Binghe, but it's not unfounded. So I don't mind shipping Shinchingcho with him. And I feel that feels so blasphemous because usually MXTX couples, I'm like, they're OTPs, they're untouchable. But this couple hasn't quite got there for me yet. And so I get it. Now, I do ship the two of them together by the time that this chapter set is over. I do ship them together. I just feel for Liu Qingge because he's done nothing wrong. He's been a nice person. He's just keep on protecting him, I guess. So, and then of course Shinchingcho's like, he's fine. He's just all bark, no bite. He'll be fine. He's going to leave as soon as he gets all his stuff out of the way. So he's like, this master has spoken his piece, so he won't come bothering you for some time. And then there's this moment where Luo Binghe or Binghe calls him Shizun, and he's like, I wanted to say it. And so he calls him that. And of course, you think of the original flavor of Luo Binghe. He probably never got the opportunity to say Shizun to Shinchingcho and have it not retaliated against in a mean fashion. The original Shinju was probably super mean to him about it and was horrible to him. And so he never got a chance to call Shinchingcho Shizun in a kind and loving way, and now he has the chance to. And he's like, well, I'll just help you here. And so he says, now the moment he said Shinchingcho over and over again and tugged on his hair and it had Luo Binghe in quotation marks, I'm like, okay, this is not really Luo Binghe. So what do we do with this? And then chapter 83 and 84, it all goes crazy. So yeah, Shinchingcho basically keeps giving him energy, and he keeps learning about Shinchingcho through the memories and dreams that he does. Shinchingcho goes off to tell Liu Qingge that he should quit being mean, quit being a meanie, and leave my boyfriend alone. And then, after he goes, he brushes his hair into a ponytail. Now, there are two images that come with this chapter set that are both really good. One image is right at the very beginning. I'll find it. Here we go. One image is of him fixing his hand because it's rough there. We see the reflection in the mirror and it doesn't look like Luo Binghe, which Luo Binghe's actions also made it very, because Luo Binghe, he is clingy. He's clingy and he's very, he's eager to please Xinqingqiu, but he's not easy to get off of you, right? Which, and here's the thing, I like Luo Binghe being a little lab puppy. I do. I like that he is kind to Xinqingqiu. He's just too emotional. He just needs some more emotional maturity. He needs to grow up a little bit more. He's supposed to be in his late 20s, but he's acting like an 18-year-old. He needs to just mature just a wee bit more and get to being an adult dog, not a puppy, so much for me to be happy with him. But he gets there a little bit this chapter set, right? So then I don't, it's crazy that Luo Binghe, the Binghe, keeps saying, you know, Shizun over and over again. And then that's when he calls her Ying Ying and she's like, no, I'm Ning Shiji, you know, like I'm not who she was in the past to him. And then when she's like, oh, I know what you'd want to do. You want to clean the bamboo house because that's what you did in the past. Well, it's all to yourself now. And he's like, why would I clean this? Who would do this in the past? Like, what? Like, he doesn't know how Luo Binghe was for Xinqingqiu back in the past. He's like, well, this is stupid. So he just leaves. And goes to Jianshu Peak, which now it makes sense because in the OG Proud Immortal Demon Way, Luo Binghe had all of the harem wives. So I'm sure he was used to just going to Jianshu Peak where all his harem wives were and just hanging out and finding out things. So that part makes sense. But here's the thing. In the past, you have Jianshu Peak where all the harem wives are, like the nuns and Liu Mingyan and all that. But in this, with Jianshu Peak, I like the difference that he's courteous because he's a gay man. And MXTX is a very good job of drawing that distinction of being like the normal guys that tried to sneak in and be peeping toms. Yeah, they'd get a sword shoved up their ass and get out. You know, that's basically what would happen. But here, everybody likes Luo Binghe because he comes and he's not interested in any women. And so they're like, oh, hey, what's going on? Just coming over here to gossip and spread the tea. Let's go. And they're just totally fine with him. Now, the book, The Signature Sleeping Willow Flower. Okay. And then he opens it up with Struck Silent. I wondered if Sleeping Willow Flower, is that a pen name for Shang Qinghua? Is that a pen name? Because wasn't he writing the books? That were about Luo Binghe and Xinqingqiu, and the books were of them? See, at first, when I thought that this was not OG Binghe, I thought he showed up and Liu Mingyan, I thought she was looking at like female porn because everybody keeps showing me fan art of her and Xiao Waling. So I keep thinking, oh, are they going to have a side story where they get together in this and that explains that? So I thought that's what it was at first because I was just influenced by that from the Discord and the comments. But what I think it was that he saw, she was basically hiding her yaoi. She was basically hiding her Don Mai under her desk, under her papers, and he caught a hold of it, saw the passages with Luo Binghe and Xinqingqiu and the fan fiction surrounding them, and was like, oh, this is what I've been missing in this world. And he learned about the tales of Shunchen and all of that. So anyway, Xinqingqiu's like, I like that Xinqingqiu knows that something is off with Luo Binghe, and he's like, I don't exactly know how to put it, but he also, you know, talks about how this Luo Binghe tries to like scrape every, like a layer of Xinqingqiu's skin off. It's like a lot more violent than puppy dog Luo Binghe. And then he talks about how he has this graceful beauty and all this. And he's like, yes, this is how I describe myself. It's fine. So this Luo Binghe gets very, very, very pushy and kind of braces that line of consent very quickly. And that's another moment that I was like, okay, this is not original Luo Binghe, because after everything that's happened, they did establish that he kind of, you know, wasn't pushing anything, right? So then Shin Cho, you know, not mentioning this at the first part, just mentioning this casually as the story goes, says that they had been, so the two of them had been intimate. They had been intimate, but no sex since that happened. Now, but for some reason, they had never done anything too forward. This was one aspect of the story that I feel like it does feel a little rushed to me. Like, I said this at the beginning during the reaction, but if you've been through a traumatic sexual experience, you don't just immediately 2 weeks later go, well, are you ready to have sex again? You just don't do that. Like, if you've been in a traumatic sexual encounter, you know, it could take, you know, years before you're okay with something like that again. And now that's non-consensual. This wasn't non-consensual that happened at the end of volume 3, but I was a little bit like, I would expect that things should have been a little more standoffish between the two of them. I know it was consensual and it was like an end of the world thing. And I'm proud that I guess Shin Cho's like, well, it was just what we had to do and I can't dwell on it. But I feel like there should be more time between them, because again, even though Shin Cho says he's okay with it, if I were Luo Binghe as a partner, I would be a little bit more communicative and be like, hey, you went through something really traumatic. Are you okay with doing this? And it's called consent. And are you fine with this? Rather than being like, do you want to just kiss and make out? Like, you know, I wish we'd had a little bit more time to kind of explore that awkwardness and really let it be a moment for Luo Binghe's character to flourish and grow and for them to talk about it. But instead, he just casually mentions that they've been doing things. Like, they've been getting back into it in the last 2 weeks. And I'm like, that seems really too soon. That seems rather sudden, right? Maybe it's because I'm used to other MXTX stories that she wrote later that involved a little bit more time in between those moments. But this was her first story. She's grown a lot as a writer since then. I still love her, but it just felt really like rushed, like too soon, especially like considering what all happened at the end of volume 3 and how shocking it was, right? And so then now it makes sense why Shin Cho was like, why does this guy know exactly what to do to put the moves on me? Why is he so proficient? And how is this fair? And at the time I thought it was because, oh, well, he has the golden finger and he's the protagonist, so it all makes sense. But no, it's because he's the original one. And yeah, he's had sex with hundreds of women. So of course he knows what to do, or at least somewhat what to do, right? Now, I will concede that the part about the blood mites and the OG Binghe being able to control him, that part does feel a little bit like a plot contrivance. Like, MXTX just had to do something, so she just put that in there, and she's like, we can do anything now. And I'm like, damn it. That's the only part of this chapter set that I was like, that seems like weak writing, MXTX. Don't do that. But it was just one little moment, so it's fine. I was just like, I've read her later novels, and those contrivances, it wasn't like that. But that's fine. It's okay. I can't write to MXTX's level, so who am I to say anything, right? Who am I to say these things? So anyway, that's when Luo Binghe shows up, which is great. And then we have chapter 84, which I do love the idea of Luo Binghe coming in like a knight in shining armor to help save Shin Cho. I do like that quite a bit, right? The one thing is, why do we still have Jinmo? Why? Didn't we? And I get why original Binghe has Jinmo, because in that version, he's all fine with Jinmo. In that version, Jinmo if we go, get that back there. In that version, Jinmo and him, they're great. They're buddy old pals. They have great chemistry. So much that it allows him to cross dimensions into parallel universes. Because why not? Shang Qinghua, airplane shooting towards the sky, wrote it to be OP, so why would we expect anything else? Why not? Why not? But my thing is, why does our Luo Binghe still have Jinmo? Why? Because, do you remember Jinmo? How he consumed your mind? Do you remember that? Do you remember Jinmo consuming your mind and you couldn't control it and it caused you to like nearly destroy the world and Shin Chingsho had to get assaulted, you know, in order to cure. Why do you still have that sword? I was like, why? I want to go back and look back at that because I was so flabbergasted. Like, why do you still have this damn sword? I thought we destroyed it. I thought that was the point of the end of Volume 3 is that you destroyed it. And so it says it has all these paper talismans. It's bound up. It's just like, it's like a kid took his toy and like wrapped it up in duct tape. I'm like, why do we still have this sword? Nope. And then Shin Chingsho's like, you don't need to use the sword. It's going to affect you negatively again. But because, you know, it's connected to like the heartbreak and it's a heart demon. So it's connected to his heartbreaking and all this and his emotional, he's a more emotional character, more in tune with his heart and his emotions because he loves Shin Chingsho. So it's able to affect him more easily than the original Binghe that is this repressed wall. Right? So that all makes sense. I'm just like, why do you have Jinmo? Get that sword out of here. No. So anyway, and then that's when Shin Chingsho's like, oh my God, what is going on? And that's when he notices that he says the original flavor of Luo Binghe, the system's punishment protocol had set him loose, this godly man who was admired by Zongdian readers everywhere. And the forums reverently uttered the same name, Binghe. So he never would have anticipated he would show up not only within the punishment protocol, but within the standard world. All this given, it seemed the system's so-called punishment hadn't just been setting a character simulation loose, it had pulled him over from a parallel universe, one that belonged to the original novel. So then, yeah, we go back how he figured out that it wasn't right, and that the chest scar and the palm thing weren't there, which Shin Chingsho should have noticed. Again, he should be more open-minded thinking about this. Something you should work on. But he says, in the end, he and Luo Binghe were too unfamiliar with each other's bodies, and that's why it had taken him so long to figure it out. But 1,000 fortunes that he'd reined it in right at the edge of the cliff. He'd been close to losing all of his integrity. He's like, so basically Shin Chingsho is saying, I maybe would have done it with this guy because I thought it was him, and I was like, okay, I guess we'll do this. That he almost stopped and then realized what it was. But it also suggests that they haven't been intimate very much because they still aren't sure of each other's bodies, as he phrases it. So, I mean, it's very clear to me that Shin Chingsho wants to be intimate. I just wish there was a little bit more time and that his character, Shin Chingsho's character, could have a little more time to reflect, and same with Luo Binghe. But that's my deal. That's just me as a reader. That's my experience talking. I don't know what else to say on that front. So then he's like, you know, he called Binghe calls, well, basically being Mai calls being gay a bastard, and it's like calling yourself that. And so basically Luo Binghe says that he's already healed from the same injuries. And he's like, the day before yesterday, I secluded myself in the underground inner walls when Jinmo's fragments unexpectedly glowed and this person appeared. So Jinmo glowed, and then this other Luo Binghe showed up as well with a Jinmo. And he's like, I entered one of Jinmo's rifts and it sealed behind me. So for a brief moment, current Luo Binghe was in the old story. Right. Which is wild. And also basically Jinmo's space-severing slash was already to heaven-defying OP levels. They could slash apart space between parallel universes. And Shin Chingsho's like, this isn't just a bug. This is like a defect of the story. So then it said a homegrown green JJ Gay had found himself. So the homegrown green JJ Gay, that reference was lost on me. I was like, what does that mean? But it's referring to Danmai is what it means. It says that homegrown Don Mai guy, basically Luo Binghe that Shin Qingqiu had raised to be a gay man, showed up in the Zongdian novel with uncountable harem of beauties. And then Shin Qingqiu says that Luo Binghe must have been frightened out of his wits. I was like, he probably wasn't there 5 minutes. He's probably like, okay, whatever. And Shin Qingqiu's like, the tenderness welled up in his heart. I was like, oh my God, Shin Qingqiu, you're being ridiculous. I can't with you. I cannot. So then that's when Binghe brings up him like messing around with Shin Qingqiu. And Shin Qingqiu questions if Binghe is bisexual, basically, or pansexual or whatever. I don't know. I'm personally under the mindset myself that the OG Binghe may have been gay. He just had it so repressed from trauma and the hatred against him that he never had the chance to openly accept that about himself like current Binghe has, but that's the thing. So anyway, so Binghe is like, he calls our current Luo Binghe useless, and Luo Binghe doesn't care about himself. He's just like, don't humiliate Shizun, which good for you. Good for you, Luo Binghe, for being kind. That's nice. Good for you. So then that's when everything's brought up about the Qing Jing Peak disciples, and Shin Qingqiu makes them go run laps so that they're out of the way, which was a funny image to see them all like conga line out of the way. And then they both end up going off to battle, and Binghe says that, you know, we're the same person, so why don't you hurt me? And Shin Qingqiu's like, you are not the same person. He's like, this is not the Stallion novel that's oozing badassery. He says, it's like, so it says, the system's grace had reshuffled onto Green JJ's Danmai page. So that must be another reference to Chinese Danmai. He's like, you all are nothing like each other. And so then he says, with technique that bad, what's so good about him anyway? Now, technique that bad could be referring to his sword fighting, his fighting vigilance, or it could be referring to his sexual prowess with Shin Qingqiu. Could be referring to that. Could be referring to that. And Shin Qingqiu's like, concentrate on the fight. And then that's when Luo Binghe kind of gets upset because he wants to know what Binghe did with them. And Shin Qingqiu's like, it's fine. And so they end up breaking each other's legs and arms. I was like, are they going to make each other into human sticks? Is that where they're going with this? And luckily that doesn't end up happening. But then Luo Binghe, the one thing I regret is that I know that they didn't want to go into details with it because it would have broken Luo Binghe's heart. But when he was like, you had met this Luo Binghe before, I kind of wanted Shin Qingqiu to talk about the punishment protocol, because I wanted him to talk about it because it would have helped to explain to Luo Binghe why Shin Qingqiu was so apprehensive. But it could have been a way for Shin Qingqiu to be like, yeah, I met him before, and that's why I was so apprehensive around you. Because it's not wrong. It's not a total lie. That is kind of the truth. It just comes full circle, but he doesn't get a chance to say that. He says it was only a chance meeting. But that's when the original Binghe uses it to talk about how he's been messing around with Shin Qingqiu and just getting Shin Qingqiu mad, and that's when he says it wasn't pleasurable in the slightest. And so that's when he activates the blood mites, which was the one part that was like, But then Shin Qingqiu's like, fine. I did like the plucking leaves, flying flowers, ultimate version, 100 leaves, 1,000 flowers. It sounded like Byakuya from Bleach. It sounded like a Bleach move that was like activating in this big moment to like cut in with all the bamboo leaves. I thought that was great. And then when the two of them work together, this is mild Heaven Officials Blessings spoilers. I'm going to raise my arm like this when I'm done with the Heaven Official Blessing spoilers, but these are spoilers for the next like couple of seconds or whatever. Whenever Luo Binghe and Shin Qingqiu work together to fight the original Binghe, that's when the story turned around for me. And what it reminded me of was in Heaven Official's Blessing at the very end when Hua Chong and Shi Lian are fighting Jun Wu together. And in the weirdest of ways, throughout Heaven Official's Blessing, Junwoo through Bai Wusheng has always kind of resembled Shi Lian, so they've always kind of looked similar. And you have Binghe, who is basically the same as Luo Binghe. So the two of them fight. So the two main characters fighting together against an enemy that kind of resembles one of them is a nice little parallel. And at that point, I was like, okay, I'm down with this. I'm down with this. End of Heaven Official's Blessing spoilers. But the part that really made me love this chapter set and made me kind of turn around was when the OG Binghe looks back and he's like seeing the two of them fighting against him. And he's like, well, I didn't have this. I had the tea poured on me. I had all this abuse, all of this. He's like, but now I look over and see someone exactly like myself, identical to me, who has his broken arm. And Shinchingcho's like cradling it and like being like, why'd you fight him head on? If you keep fighting even though you knew your arm was broken, don't be so reckless next time. Like he's being super sweet to him. And I like that we basically through this chapter get to see Shinchingcho and Luo Binghe through someone else's eyes. And through his eyes, they look like a loving couple. And it's infuriating and unfair to him that he doesn't get to have that. His Shinchingcho was awful. Shinju had become an awful person, and he was never going to get to have that moment with him at all. That's what made the chapter set for me. And it's so infuriating. I agree with Luo Binghe, with the OG one. I agree it's infuriating because from his standpoint, when he sees them as a couple, they look like they're just lovey-dovey and everything's right as rain. But then when we're with them, they're just like two bakas that you want to just gently shake. And you're like, stop it. It's ridiculous. So yeah, he's like, he just wanted to humiliate them because their disgusting relationship elicited nothing but his contempt, but yet. And then he says, come with me to Shinchingcho, which is exactly what Luo Binghe kept saying to him throughout this novel, which to me says that the original Binghe wanted to say, come with me to the OG Shinchingcho, and it just wasn't possible because of how Shinju was. It's wild! It's wild! It's wild, I tell you! Oh my god. So yeah. So then Shinchingcho's like, well, what do we do? Do we kill him? He's like, if I kill him, is this Luo Binghe gonna die? Is it gonna set off another butterfly effect? What happens to Proud Immortal Demon Way? He's like, what do we do? He's like, what happens? And then what ends up happening is that the OG Luo Binghe, he slaps away Jinmo's paper seals, dark chi and purple light surged forth, and with the other two still on full alert. Oh, okay. So it looks like to me that the original Binghe took Jinmo and the other Jinmo with him and just cut the dimension and left. As he looked back, he viciously bit his lip. It was so infuriating. And Shinchingcho's like, okay, well, that was weird. I also love that Shinchingcho's like, could you head back and destroy Jinmo's fragments? You can't keep something like that around. Like, yes. I'm like, why do you still have that? So I'm glad that Shinchingcho said something about it. He's like, the bugs in this thing's codes are too serious. He's like, if they held onto it, who knew what developments could happen next? I like Shinchingcho's like, let's not keep this and have somebody else from another dimension show up. He's like, we don't need another Shinchingcho. We don't need anything. We don't need Shinju showing back up. We don't need anything like that. Let's just stop this right now. That was nice. We've established parallel universes, multiverse. Great. Let's not have that happen again. And so Luo Binghe is like, okay, fine. And I like that Shinchingcho, even though he didn't need to support him, he does lend him one of his arms because he's just nice like that. Like the nicest. And so then Luo Binghe's like, well, is my technique really that awful? And Shinchingcho's like, yes, it is. Like, everything about you is feral. He's like, and then the dark humor of him saying when it came to thrusting, he's like, it was also a fail. I was like, MXTX, that is some dark humor. And then he's like, well, not really, because he knows that if he hurts Luo Binghe's feelings, he'll probably try to destroy the world again. And he's like, well, And that's my thing, is that Luo Binghe just gets super, super gloomy. And he's like, well, you don't have a lot of experience, so we can do some exploring together. The only thing that kind of threw me off from the ending of this was when he was like, now I'm going to heal your leg. And then once it's healed up, we'll do some exploring together. It sounded like a parent talking to a kid. And that was the only part that made me go, I don't know. That didn't sound like a partner talking to a partner. It sounded like a parent talking to a kid. And I was like, It just didn't, it made me feel like I was reading like an old man yaoi, where it's like a guy in his 40s with a guy in his 20s. But here's the thing, that's not the case, because both of them are in their 20s. So that's not it at all. So it was weird. It was weird. And so then, of course, Luo Binghe, again, quit manipulating Shinchingcho, because he's just like, I'm fine. And I'm like, you just the whole, oh no, I'm so injured, so make out with me because I'm so injured. But then you were fine. So I'm like, stop it. I mean, I am excited to see the two of them go exploring, because they need to talk, they need to explore, they need to figure out how to work out their relationship and learn each other's bodies and what each other want. Like, communication is so important, and I hope that they do that in these future chapters. So I'm excited to see that. But this chapter set was a roller coaster, and I didn't know how I'd feel about it at first, but I did end up really liking it. So good. Oh my God, I spent so long on this chapter set. Next week, we're going to be looking at chapters 85, which is the last chapter of this first part, and chapter 86, which is its own part, which will be pages 49 through 80. So still a big chunk, and PDF pages 34 through 59. So we'll be checking that out next week. I'm going to learn to just read the reaction and read the passage and let it all flow, and then come back and talk about it with y'all and see what we get. But anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this reaction and discussion. I'm curious to know your thoughts down below, but I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back real soon with more Scum Villain self-saving system. Bye!